Now live. I'm just going to give it a few moments while people fill in and then we'll get started.
Just sent it to you, John.
Thanks.
All right, I see I'm filling in. Just give it another second. All right, looks like we're leveling off a bit. I'm sure people will continue to fill in over these first few moments here, but I'd like to go ahead and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our CMFO Roundtable Discussion today. We appreciate you being here with us as always. We have a lot of great topics to cover and a lot of great presenters joining us to discuss those topics. So to keep things interactive and help you earn your credit, I will be jumping into launch polls throughout. Just a reminder to please keep your eye out and complete those. And those are for your credit. So it's important that you get those in. And we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please submit your questions for our moderators in the chat and Q&A, and we will address all of those. And with that being said, I'll now pass it over to Bud Jones, John Mooney, and Jon Rheinhardt, who will be moderating today's discussion.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Katie. And I just want to reemphasize for a minute what Katie was saying. These are roundtables. You know, we encourage comments, questions, sharing experiences to make this a better session for everyone. So I'll start with introducing our two panelists for the first session, State Health Benefits Plan. Giovanni Mancini is president of Treadstone Risk Management, which he founded in 2016 after serving as director of the Public Entities Division at CBIZ Insurance Services. Giovanni began his career in 2010 as an account manager at a small retail agency in Union County before the firm was acquired by CBIZ. He holds multiple advanced industry designations, including Chartered Property and Casualty Underwriter, CPCU, Associate in Risk Management for Public Entities, ARM-P, Construction Risk Insurance Specialist, and Certified School Risk Manager. Giovanni earned a bachelor's degree in Economics and Political Science from Drew University, where he also served as captain of the baseball team and later completed a Master of Science in Insurance Management from Boston University. With a strong focus on the New Jersey public sector, Giovanni is an active member of the New Jersey Association of School Business Officials and is past president of its Associate Membership Executive Committee. He was also part of the first class of the Morristown Community Emergency Response Team. Giovanni now holds New Jersey licenses in property and casualty, life and health insurance, and resides in Morristown with his wife, Cassie. And we have Jason Gabloff, CFO and Administrator, Township of Mendham, and CFO, Township of Millburn. Jason is a certified municipal finance officer with more than 20 years of experience in municipal finance. He holds a Master of Public Administration from Seton Hall University and currently serves as both administrator and CFO for the Township of Mendham. He has also been the CFO for the Township of Millburn since 2003 and serves as the part-time CFO for the Borough of Neckham, a role he has held since 2000. Jason is the past president of the Government Finance Officers Association of New Jersey and former chairman of the Morris County Municipal Joint Insurance Fund. He's also an instructor for Rutgers University, teaching municipal finance courses for CMFO certification in New Jersey, and serves as an adjunct professor in the MPA program at Seton Hall University. Jason is a frequent speaker at the New Jersey League of Municipalities Conference and the GFOA of New Jersey Annual Conference. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Bud. So I guess Gio, I'll kind of kick it off, and I'll hand it off to you. So one clarification: I think my bio still had me in Millburn. I don't know if Matt Larrasy's on. He didn't lose his job. That's probably just a typo or an older version. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us this morning. And our first topic that Gio and I are going to talk about are, I think, the issues that we all know are it's an impending issue for those of us in the State Health Benefits Fund. I think everybody's been seeing the rate increases over the last few years. And the recent notifications, we're looking at another 25 to 35% increases for this year. Those of us that are in smaller towns, but even some of the larger towns, there's not a great answer right now. So we're going to talk about some of those problems. And really, Gio's the professional and the expert there. For my part, I'm just kind of floated a balloon out that many of you responded to, just to see who might be interested in looking into other options with maybe forming another HIF. So with Gio and a few others, we're starting to move into that process and just do some fact finding. So I think as we go through this, there'll be some information regarding some of that and maybe what some of the other options are. So I'm going to kick it to Gio, and I'm happy to kind of jump in and try and answer questions about forming a HIF. I'm kind of learning as we go here as well. So I think with that, Gio, you probably have a lot more info to share.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. Everyone, thank you for the opportunity. This is a pressing time in the public sector. We had, as brokers in the community, had talked about it for many years now. This is my 15th year in the public sector, and the ability to stay afloat of a pool like the State Health Benefits Plan that likely will always suffer from adverse selection because it's the taker of all and the taker of last resort. At some point, that would eventually catch up, and it's natural in the insurance world for a pool like that to have issues like this. Where they go and whether or not they pivot to either unwinding it completely or making major structural plan design changes is unknown yet, but I do expect there to be a major change on the horizon at this upcoming renewal. And if it's not this year, it most certainly is next year, but I don't see how they get past this renewal without there being some sort of a change in the immediate future. I'm going to share the screen now, and can everyone see that? I'll throw up a slideshow. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yep, look
Perfect.
good.
All right, so I did mention I played college baseball. I was a crummy left-handed pitcher. I was okay, I guess, my senior year, but I do like to throw this up there just to remind myself of, more fun. I've been for the last 15 years talking insurance, and as you can imagine, it's a fairly boring job for the most part. This was a more exciting part of my life, but you will notice I do reference the school world a lot. Most of my work in the early part of my career was exclusively in the school board marketplace. I'll be frank, it was, for me at the time, I had worked at a board of education as an intern while I was in college. It was just something I was familiar with. So it was the path of least resistance for me, and it provided the most opportunity. In the last 6 years or so, I've now pivoted to doing both of them and the municipal world with increasing regularity. And at this point now, with the impending opportunity in our world, and then some of the fear and uncertainty and doom that is going to be plaguing yours, I think that there is solutions out there, but I think we will be somewhat pressed for time, all things considered. So I'll get into that. And the first part of it is the 18-page document that was released by the state treasurer in regards to the structural and financial challenges in the state health benefits plan for the local government. I have read all 18 pages a few times over now, and I wanted to provide you with as succinctly of a summary as I possibly could, while touching on the points that I find to be most important. The first part is a few quotes that I pulled out of it, and they're concerning. What began as a commitment to offer affordable, high-quality coverage to public employees has become structurally unstable and financially unstable system due to adverse selection, diminished participation, and cost escalation. Notably, even the most aggressive plan design changes likely will not be enough to reverse the systemic unraveling underway. And finally, specifically, policymakers should consider significant reforms to transition to an alternative delivery mechanism, or to partially stabilize the volatile enrollment pool and provide more agile governance. These three quotes are all found either on the first page or the last page. And many times over, that's some of the only pages that people read when it comes to insurance. But these are damning quotes, I'll be very frank. The information that's inside of the 18 pages will explain why they were made, but for the most part, and it will be touched on later, it seems as though it's an all but an uncertainty at some point that there will be an unraveling of the state health benefits plan, whether it be this year or next year. And you'll notice when we go to talk about it a bit in the 18 pages, it was the one talked about most extensively as compared to the other three options that they viewed as potential alternatives to salvaging the current system that we have in place. So the program background, the state health benefits plan is really split into three funds, but two of them on the municipal side, you have the state side and then you have the local government side. The local government side is a large self-insurance pool. It's $2 billion in annual premiums, covers 156,000 plus members, employees, retirees, and dependents. And there's about, I think it's 689 or 691, depending on what day it is, local employers that are still remaining in it, of which would be a potential about 1,200 in New Jersey. So, just a little bit over half still remain in the state health benefits plan for local governments. 26 plan options for actives, 28 for early retirees, Medicare retirees, and then 3 dental plans. And there's critical structural concerns that we're going to be talking about. The first being adverse selection. And it's in the insurance world, the worst thing that can happen to a pool, particularly to a pool that has no ability to underwrite and deny any of its applicants. The second part, that while it's a benefit to the members, it's a concern for it, is the high actuarial plan values. When we talk about actuarial plan values, it's essentially how much of a dollar does your plan expect to pay on any type of given claim. And the higher that number is closer to that dollar, the more benefit rich it is, and the more you stray away from what the average plan is in America. The public sector has the most benefit rich plans that I know of, and they are at the minimum 7 to 8% higher as far as benefits go than even the highest ACA platinum plans. And then finally, you have the claim stabilization reserve that the state health benefits plan uses to pay claims, and its current level of depletion, which has led to a Chapter 86 borrowing from the state health benefits state plan. And then what that means ultimately for next year's renewal, mainly because of the time constraints on how that has to be paid back and by when. So the impact of adverse selection. So what this really means is we have higher risk individuals that are disproportionately purchasing insurance, causes imbalance and strain on the insurance company or the self-insurance pool. And in the state plan, because at any point you go into the pool because it's cheaper than or a better option than what you had previously, it's always going to be likely that great performing groups are going to move out of it and the poor performing groups are going to go into it. That continuance will put pressure on the renewal pricing. And if no changes are made to the plan or the plan design itself, price is typically the only thing that can change, and it always ends up going up in the event of adverse selection. Now, this issue will exacerbate itself over time because more and more, if you have a 20% increase, anything that was even remotely close to getting out will do so. And you'll see in a bit what that has looked like over the last couple of years. It leads to increased premiums, the risk pool deteriorates, and then potentially the market itself will fail. And this is a large market. This is a $2 billion annual premium. It's a very large market. There is some regulatory response we have in New Jersey. It happens at the broader level nationally to help mitigate these adverse selection effects. Some of them that you might be familiar with was it was effective on the auto insurance world, but requiring people to purchase insurance, everyone, the mandate is one of the things that is used to mitigate adverse selection. In New Jersey with auto insurance, when it became a requirement, we ultimately saw the lowering of the per person rate on the liability side. And that was the goal, or the intended goal of the Affordable Care Act. But the lack of enforcement of it ultimately is what's going to continue to cause their premiums, deductibles, and max amount of pockets to continue to increase. And then challenging strategies, you could have reform, but if it persists, ultimately it's going to require either the market to make a drastic change or that market to ultimately close itself out. The actuarial value that we talk about, I said a little bit about it before, but if you have, let's say, a $10,000 bill that's coming on, if your plan is going to pick up 97 $100 of it, you have an actuarial value of 97%. So if the average nationally on a $10,000 bill, the insurance company is picking up 6 of it, with our plans, it's about 95 to 97% in that, between like 93 and 98, meaning we drastically exceed the Affordable Care Act's highest plans that can be available. And they are as benefit rich as any that exist currently nationally, in my opinion. Financial status, you'll see in the graph on the right, these are the, Aon is the consultant for the state health benefits plan, and they put out a mid-year budget review every year that is, at least in the last few years, typically fairly shocking on what type of renewal increase would be needed in order to get back to a claim stabilization reserve of at least 2 months, which is their recommended amount. You'll see the premium increases, which are cumulative on the right side, that over that next 4 to 5 year period, renewals of 60% are needed in order to get us back to a rate stabilization fund that is at that 2-month mark. So you can see the stated losses. The state SEHBP lost $113 million. Their prescription is wildly running, and that's no different than any of the other state plans or any of the private or self-insured health insurance funds that are out there. The prescription, particularly GLP-1 inhibitors, have been some of the more expensive instances in recent memory. You'll see that at the local government level, there's a net loss of $48 million, a full depletion of the claim stabilization reserve, which is of the 3 funds, the only one that occurred in. And there's still $120 million in outstanding IOUs, essentially, that the local government fund owes to the state fund. Now, if you remember, I said that it was about a $2 billion fund. So a $120 million number would be about 6 to 7%, depending on what the total cost is that they end up having to pay back. There's rising cost drivers and what the outlook is going to look like. Medical inflation has been between 6 and 8% for quite a while now. So that number, if nothing changes, if our claims are relatively even, if there's no change to the plan itself, typically you expect between 6 and 8% at the minimum in medical inflation, at least over the last decade. Prescription drugs are growing significantly faster. Between anti-inflammatory drugs and GLP-1 inhibitors, we're seeing year-over-year increases of close to 100% on GLP-1 inhibitors. They're very expensive and very popular. So you can see from 2023 to 24, it was a 99% surge, which adds incredible pressure. You'll hear Chapter 86 transfers mentioned. Chapter 86 permits a temporary transfer from the state plan to the local government plan if there's a cash flow issue. So when they depleted the claim stabilization fund entirely, it did necessitate the need now for a Chapter 86 transfer. $258 million was transferred from the state plan to the local government plan at the end of March. And as of today, there's still $120 million outstanding on that, which, as we get closer to the renewal, at some point needs to be factored in to that. So let's do the quick math then. $120 million owed to the state plan, 6% of the $2 billion in annual premium that they receive under Chapter 86. It's got to be repaid within 120 days, except for extraordinary circumstances where the Director of Pension Benefits can authorize up to a full year. The mid-year actuarial analysis from Aon was a 19.5% premium increase just to replenish the 2 months of claim stabilization that had already been depleted. So as a result, we're at 25% before we factor in any medical trend whatsoever. So if you have a year of medical trend that's over 8%, we're starting to talk about a number north of 30 and closer to 35%. Now, what would be more likely is that while they recommended 2 months of claim stabilization, I imagine that they would tier it over a period of time that is longer than the 12 months that we're going to be coming up on, as such that full 19.5 probably wouldn't be charged if they decide to do this, but it is a distinct possibility. And when we talk about a potential for the state health benefits plan to unravel, it's more likely that that's where that would come into play, in my opinion. One of the issues that will always affect the state plan is the way that it's currently structured. And what I mean by that is it's a slow-moving entity, and slow-moving entities will be negatively affected by things like inflation and the inability to pivot quickly. And part of that is why people love the plan as well, because they feel confident that they're not worried that it would be a quick decision to make a plan design change in the middle of the year that could affect them. But as it's set up now, the plan design committee is equal parts labor and equal parts management representation. So there's no tiebreaker, and there's rarely anything that gets done as far as a voting point. State officials, they would prefer if they had the ability to either break that tie or make necessary changes in the middle of the year if it's found that the claim stabilization fund is going to run dry. And then they'll use other states that they'll say, like, let's say CalPERS. So in California, there is a 5-year wait. If you were going to leave their state plan, you cannot return then for 5 years. So their discussion on what can be instituted in New Jersey that can either mirror some of the successes in other states that are out there right now, and that's if they continue on with the plan and don't unwind it. So the death spiral phenomenon of adverse selection is healthy groups leave the plan, they worsen the risk pool, causes premiums to rise, and that prompts more exits. So because you have a 10% you in the beginning as a township administrator or a board of education, you cut from different programs or jobs, unfortunately. But as these numbers start to rise from 10% to 20 to 25 to 30, you're left with very little else you can do other than, the pool itself has to essentially be unwound completely. And if there's no change to the benefits, and when we say change to the benefits, there's been many changes over the years that have been small, slight changes to added network reimbursement, slight changes to the caps on physical therapy or acupuncture or chiropractic services, slight changes to mandatory generics under certain plans. But still the maximum out of pocket is very generous. The benefits for out of network are still very generous as compared to any other benchmark. In some of the other HIFs that we're going to talk about, one of the larger spends is the added network reimbursement. And the starting point with which that negotiation starts with an added network provider makes a lot of difference. However, when you start at a lower number in that negotiation process, you run the risk of delaying payment to the provider, which then sours potentially a relationship between them and the employee, particularly if it's a recurring provider like a physical therapist or an acupuncture person. But if you start, let's say, a benchmark of 150% of Medicare, and when I say Medicare is essentially the cost of the services plus a 30 or 40% markup. In the state health benefits plans, many times for a long period of time, they would start at 300% of that Medicare number. In recent years, it's now dropped down closer to 200%, but some of the health insurance funds started as low as 150%. And it does take a longer time to negotiate, but there are more advantageous outcomes as far as what they're able to end up with final number with out-of-network providers. And when you don't have a lot of ability to navigate pricing changes inside of a network, you're left with prescription and out-of-network benefits. Those are the ones you're really tackling, because utilization management, while possible, it's usually pressed against by most of the collective bargaining units. So there's immediate cost-saving measures. We talk about them all the time. Higher copays for the ER urgent care. You'll see them go up incrementally if you look back 10 or 12 years or so, limiting physical therapy visits to a month, to 30 of them, adjusting the prescription copays, going to more mail order. All of these are very small. And in totality, if all done together, they do reduce over time. However, in the instance that we're in right now, it doesn't seem to be that even if every one of them were to be agreed to, that we would put a big enough dent in this number where something else more drastic would have to occur. Increasing deductibles or maximum out of pockets, migrating away from some of the more generous PPO plans, it's always something that's going to be discussed, but it's unlikely that some sort of a drastic change like that is going to get a ton of support. So there are reform options that are mentioned in the 18 pages, and one of them is mentioned more than others, and it's an alternative delivery model. What we mean by that is how you deliver benefits to your employees will be done in an alternative mode, whether it be a fully insured product whether it be a pooled product with a fully insured carrier or a health insurance fund, or if you're big enough, a self-insured product. The transition from the group insurance funds or to a multiple employer welfare arrangement would enhance risk pooling and policy management and plan management. But there are others. You could have withdrawal and entry policy reforms. So right now with the state health benefits plan, there is a bit of flexibility there. If you were to leave it and how quickly you can then come back in, if you're able to either lock in commitments from some of the employers, or if you're able to say you can't return for a certain period of time. The numbers thrown around are between, I think, 3 and 5 years. That would more than likely prevent or strongly urge a group to not leave for a small single-digit bit of savings if their concern is that they'll have a double digit the next year and be right back where they were and they go back to the state plan. The other one is designate a plan design authority. So if we have a gridlock or a deadlock right now at the plan design committee level, that somebody from the state treasurer or the department or the Division of Pension Benefits is able to make on the fly routine plan changes as needed, depending on how much money is left in the claims reserve fund. And then the last one is the expansion of the claims reserve fund. Building a bigger reserve would allow them to improve some of their financial sustainability. When you only charge premium to cover a 2-month period, you are running at what I deem to be the lower side of the safety net. And when you routinely allow that number that's recommended to be at 2 months to dip below a single month down to just days, you are in an area of concern at the minimum. And in that report, they spent about a page and a half talking about the phased and orderly closing of the state health benefits plan local government option. So in this idea, and the other 3 options, they gave about 1 paragraph of discussion on. Even if all 3 of those were put together, they said that they did not believe that if all of the latter 3 were put together, they would still be able to stop the adverse selection related issues. So if they phase and orderly closed the state health benefits plan, what would it look like? Local employers would receive technical and financial report during the transition. That would be temporary stop loss insurance, regulatory safeguards. Some third-party vendors would probably provide reasonably priced options to make it so that it was easy to go in the first year. Because what you're going to end up happening is, let's say you're a group that's 50 lives and you've been running at 130, 135% for the last 10 years. Well, because of the state health benefits plan, you were under the assumption that you were not running, that your normal group is running at that 100% number or somewhere less. But what realistically is the case is that your claims are 130% for a reason. And that's how ultimately you should probably be priced in a market where you're not being subsidized by another employer. So what would end up happening there is you would more than likely have these regional options that would come about. And the reason why I always urge people to take a look at it regionally is because the cost of care in certain parts of New Jersey is substantially higher than others. In the Northwest and the South, you'll find that there's a lot of groups that are out of the state health benefits plan, if they can be, because the cost of their care is lower. They're able to get lower pricing from insurance companies as a result of it. And then because at no point, ever, did they ever bifurcate the rates inside of the state health benefits plan. It was something that I did think that they should have done. In the workers' compensation world, you might be in the same insurance fund with other entities from all over the state, but there's going to be a specific regional deviation that's applied to your premiums to consider the costs of services in that area. And it probably would have been something that benefited the state health benefits plan had it ever been instituted. But because everyone paid the same rate, that was one of the issues. So group insurance funds is what it's referred to in the report, but they're more commonly referred to as health insurance funds. They're widely used already. There's about 45% of New Jersey's eligible local units are already in them in some form. And I have the large majority of them are in about 7 different funds that are called the high funds that are run by PERMA. And PERMA is a long-standing entity that is partly responsible for saving the property and casualty market in the 1980s and creating some of the first joint insurance funds to pool liability and property and auto risks. In the health insurance world, it did exist for a period of time, and then it didn't for a little while. It was legislation against it. But at this point now, there is a migration of groups to it that can be incredibly lucrative over a 5-year period. If I do have a little graph for you to show you what the 5-year rates are in some of the current funds. So if 1,200 eligible entities are out there, 45% of them are already in these health insurance funds, and I think that number will grow substantially over the next couple of years. You do have other options like commercial carriers that are fully insured, but you do have to remember that for years, fully insured carriers had kind of a Eastman Kodak dilemma on their hands, where they didn't want to cannibalize their revenues by offering their networks as a rental, because then they would be losing the fully insured product, which is where they were attempting to make their money. So for years, Horizon wouldn't even consider renting a network. And as such, because the state plan had Horizon's network, they were always in favor with most of the bargaining units. And then if you were to go out in a health insurance fund, most of them started as Southern AmeriHealth funds. And now Aetna is largely the dominant network that's available inside of these health insurance funds.
Hey, Giovanni, before we move
Sure.
on, I'm just going to jump in with our first poll.
Go ahead.
Okay, so everyone should see this first question. Are you currently enrolled in the state health benefits program? And then I'll share the responses once everyone gets in.
All right. Yeah, of those 1,200 members, remember they're utility authorities, you have some housing authorities, but there's about 689 to 690 that are currently in there right now. So 55% of the entire local government force is still in there. And as you can imagine, if they're all facing similar issues, there is going to be a lot going on over these next couple months, if in fact it is unwound. It's something that, go ahead.
Sorry, Gio. Another interesting question would be, see who's a self-insured, who's in a HIF, or a private plan.
I do have most of that too. All the health insurance funds, I have the enrolled groups now, and it's mostly done by county, which is the way to do it, in my opinion. The only one that doesn't do it is because, and it's something that they're considering now as well, is the school's health insurance fund. They are by far the largest. It's about $775 million in total premium. Over 100 different schools are in it, and they at some point might bifurcate rates depending on where the entity is located. But right now, there's about 6 or 7 other health insurance funds for local governments, and they're mostly geography based. So yeah, this pretty much mirrors a lot of what's going on currently. So 54, it's almost identical actually. I think it's 54, 55% of the total marketplace is in the state health benefits plan currently. And here we have about 44%. It's very close to what the actual figure is. And a lot of the ones that are in it are going to be smaller. And unfortunately, it's mainly due to a few things, like why aren't more local governments in there? Well, first one is sticker shock. So if I told you that you're at 130%, the obvious answer is there's no way I'm leaving the state health benefits plan if I'm able to get a renewal quote. If I can get numbers from them, there's no way I'm leaving because it doesn't make financial sense. So the only time that you even would consider it is if there isn't an option to renew anymore with the state health benefits plan. So as a broker, I completely understand that. So that's the first part. Some of the established HIFs, and many of you are familiar with it, they have growth caps where they can only grow a certain percentage, or they have a maximum that they can get to as far as total enrolled members. And once they hit that, they can't have anybody in for that policy year or until someone else leaves, depending on how the bylaws are written. But most of them have just a growth cap of, at the school level, it's 20%. Some of the other HIFs are the same way for any given year. So if we're not first in, or we're not the most attractive of groups as far as loss ratio goes, we miss out. The smaller local governments have even limited options because they might not have any fully insured options because of the size. If you're under 50 lives, there isn't much that you can go do. And in the event that you are able to join like a pooled arrangement in a fully insured product, they might not offer any claims experience. So you're in an even worse position than you are with the state health benefits plan in the event that that unraveled and you didn't have that option to go back to. And the only thing that you could do is stay in this pool that you were in that didn't give you claims experience. On the health insurance fund side, detailed claims experience is provided at the minimum quarterly to the members, and it'll allow you to look at what your current spend is primarily focused on. And then if there is an option to either tackle that or have some sort of lifestyle changes encouraged, you can do that. In the state health benefits plan, currently, very little is given to you outside of some of your high spenders and then what your total amount is pretty much for the month. And that limited claims experience is also what keeps away interest from other carriers as well. Network options is also, the other reason. For many years, Horizon has been the favored network of employees. So because they didn't rent out their network very often, if ever, it was always a bit of a barrier entry to get yourself out of the state health benefits plan if you were feeling there was going to be a bit of a fight from your local bargaining unit and there wasn't enough money savings to justify that. And you definitely wouldn't do it if it was more expensive to go to it, but a health insurance fund. So yeah, the bargaining units, I do have these are the ones I were quickly able to find out. You can see the size of the health insurance funds that exist. I also have the each county, which ones that are in there. But for the most part, if you look at a lot of Hunterdon, Warren, Morris County, Passaic, they do fall into some of these, but some of them are capped with their growth and they're not going to let in other members. And because of that, there really needs to be either another fund for smaller groups that need to have an option. There's a possibility that you'll see a few of them increase those caps out of a favor for other members that are going to be looking to get in for this year. But for the most part, many of them have bylaw caps on these. So it is going to be difficult for some of the groups that are, in the higher hundreds, as far as their loss ratio, to really do much at all if a small town HIF is not created as a solution for those. But there still will be what I would call kind of a correction year where there's going to be a large increase regardless of what the solution is, staying with the state plan in the high 20s or going to a health insurance fund and taking on a 20% increase just to get regular rates and then going from there. But what I will encourage about them is they do become sophisticated enough where if the bylaws are written correctly, you'll have a few entities that will have rates or loss ratios that are better than other groups. And as a result, they're able to ebb and flow, sometimes up to 2.5% either way, depending on how their claims are that year. There's also the ability to have dividends in years that maybe we paid a little bit too much into premium by being conservative in some of our loss picks. And that money after that claim year closes can be just redistributed back to the members. And what I particularly like about it is long before the Chris Christie, there was kind of the raid on what were called premium stabilization funds with health insurance carriers, where you were able to kind of bank some of the not spent budget premium that you already had looked at. But those ended up getting raided. The retained dividends of at least the school's health insurance fund have been robust in recent years and have been used to offset increases that were above and beyond what the school might have budgeted for that year. So there is a built-in structural advantage there for the concerns of having these large ebb and flow, high 20% numbers. So in years that were conservative with our actuarial analysis and we probably charge too much in rates, that money can then be kept and it doesn't have to just go right out the door to pay for a Chapter 86 transfer that we took or another group that's in a different area that's significantly more expensive to find medical providers and services. So that's kind of the screenshot. If you look at the 5-year averages on the right, you'll see that none of them are above 6.2%. I think the Metropolitan HIF it's why they don't probably publish theirs, but it's a fairly newer and a very rapidly growing fund in like the Essex County, Union County, that type of area. So over time, I do expect that one to level out a bit more. But the ones that have been running for years, like the South Jersey Fund, you can tell that the costs are less in South Jersey, and it's why many of them are outside of the state health benefits plan, but they've been running at 1% or less for the last 5 years, which is probably, I'll say, a pipe dream for a lot of local government employers. So I do have, I think I'm at 40 minutes now, so I do want to open up for questions if anybody has it, or if Jason, if you
Giovanni,
wanted to add to it.
there was one question from Mike Garino.
Mhm.
He said, bottom line, how do municipalities fund these expanding costs with the budgetary constraints in place? And, yes, moving to a HIF may reduce costs, but on both sides of this, state health benefits and HIF, health costs in general are skyrocketing beyond our control. Plus the bargaining units have language equal or better.
Yeah. So you're in the worst position possible. I won't deny that. You're in a place where you cannot do much as far as negotiating if you're in the middle of a contract with that bargaining unit. The only thing that can really be done are typically things that bother the collective bargaining agreement. And what I mean by that is GLP-1 inhibitors right now are the most expensive part of our prescription, and they're running wild as far as total costs. What the school's health insurance fund did, which has angered a few of the bargaining units, is they decided to have utilization management with a particular set of GLP-1 inhibitors, either Wegovy or Ozempic, where you had to use something. It was Express Scripts, I believe, owns Omada Health. And Omada Health would essentially, like, if you remember smoking cessation coaches back in the day, you would have to check in if you were on this medication, weigh yourself a certain times a week. And their belief is that if they can maintain some form of utilization management, they can either weed people off of it that shouldn't be on it, or get people to lose the weight that they desire to lose faster and thereby not needing it for a longer period of time. Now, those schools that had these Omada utilization issues are now going to perk because it was grieved. So we'll find out quickly if that's going to be an issue. As you can imagine, the school's SEHPP did not require that. And as a result, it's probably going to cost the SEHPP more money over time. If PERC makes a ruling in favor of the district, then I would quickly imagine that the state plan would then follow suit. But they are, in my opinion, always the last mover in these issues. And as such, it always ends up costing more money for those plans. But I don't expect, outside of areas where you're able to get into a HIF, and I'm not exactly sure what town you're from, but if you're in, I use Bergen County a lot, and in the school board world, if you look at, they have 70 school districts there, 60 of them are in the state health benefits plan. They all run over 100% loss ratio for the most part by a bit. And it's mostly because the cost of services out there are much higher. So what I do think is going to happen is if you're in an area where there is higher cost for services, there has to be a reckoning at some point where you get insured with other entities that are of similar region. And there's a reckoning of premiums where you now kind of have an idea of what the actual cost is. And then from that moment, whether it be loss of employees or loss of benefits, that you were able to get that under control over time. But I don't see how long-term the benefit actuarial value of these benefit plans is going to be able to be sustained in the high 90s without there being some stronger form of utilization management requirements, or a further, I would call it, cutting of fat, where you could have more mandatory generics, you can have the same piecemeal parts where you might be able to save a point or two over time. But outside of that, the only real way I see it happening is that there's a correction that comes. You get to a point where now you have a legitimate rate that you're going to be charging per month. And it's more than likely, if you're still in the state plan and you're over 50 lives, it's probably going to be 20 or 30% higher. And then from there, your fund is very aggressive in 3 areas: prescription and utilization management of that, your out-of-network reimbursements. And one of the recommendations we had, and this is 7 years ago now, is if you're a regional type of fund that was just created, and that there's physical therapists, chiropractors, and acupuncturists that the majority of your local regional fund goes and sees, I would highly encourage that, most of them being out of network, you go to them with a direct contract saying, if you see anyone inside of our fund you agree to the rate now. It saves us money long-term on having to deal with the third-party administrator that's going to handle the claims, because they get paid for every claim that they handle and every claim that they're able to essentially chisel down from whatever the starting point was. And you eliminate, some of that billing work for that provider, who can then say, if I know what I'm going to get and I can be comfortable with that, I'm willing to allow anyone in this network to do that. And because they're not in network, you have to come to some form of a separate direct contract with that provider. And you can do that with many of those providers, and that is a way to save money long term. I don't know if it's enough to make a big enough dent to really get these under control, but I do expect there to be a need to bifurcate the rates in the state, and then at some point get stronger on utilization management, or unfortunately, a lowering of benefit levels. I think those are really the only ones.
If I can,
Giovanni, there was another question from
Sure.
Kim Brown. Have counties considered opening up enrollments to their municipalities? And we have Mr. Rheinhardt from Bergen County.
if I can jump in real
Go ahead.
quick before you guys
Sure.
answer that. So I think from my part, and Gio gave us a lot of really good and scary information to an extent, but it's
Yeah.
important for everybody to hear. And that's the question is, and I think the slide you had about, we don't pivot quickly, local government and government in general. So the question is how quickly will we be able to move as we're starting to look at forming another HIF, what the size could be. There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. And, to Mike's question, the budget pressures that we're all facing, I don't know if there's a quick and easy answer to that. None of us can continue to handle 20% health benefit increases,
Yeah.
but to the extent that we're going to try and control what we can control. We all have the same pressures with our unions. The equal or better language makes it a little bit more difficult. But we're going to have to start looking at that a little bit differently and look at more of a partnership with our unions to really get them to understand. And, what we did during our open enrollment last year, and I'm sure some of you do this, we spent 2 hours with our unions and during their contract negotiations and really sat down, and we got some changes, maybe not to the extent that I was hoping, but some of the employees are starting to get that. If it costs us more money, it's costing them more money.
Yeah.
Just so we need to figure out how to work together. And that's kind of the path I'd like to see if we go down with this idea behind a new HIF. So, Gio had all the info, but I'm trying to work behind the scenes with a few people here. And I got interest from about 30 towns at this point with over 1,100 bodies. So there will be something here, and it's across the state from up all the way towns in Bergen County down to West May. So I don't know how all this comes together, but that more will be coming for me, I think, as we start to move forward. So
yeah, that 1,000 life amount is really that sweet spot where you can really talk about getting, because what's going to end up happening is you're not going to have what is called credible claims experience if you're under 50 lives for the most part. It's none of the carriers are going to view it at an individual level. So you're going to have to be banded with other groups or join a pool that already exists, either with a fully insured carrier or creating or going into an existing health insurance fund. But if that's not an option, and let's say the worst case scenario is they say we're going to wind down effective 1/1 and we'll, kind of blend it over a 6-month or maybe a year period where, we'll either help with premium payments at the state level to get your HIF up off the ground, or, and this is what I think it is, when you start a HIF, the hardest part about starting anything that's self-insured is not the third-party administrator. It's not the network that you're going to rent. It's not figuring out what the benefits are going to be. It's getting what's called aggregate stop-loss insurance. So there's specific and aggregate stop-loss insurance. Specific is for one specific claim. So somebody goes and has, it could be a large and expensive surgery, or, a maintenance medication that might cost a couple $100,000 a year. Whatever the specific limit is, anything over that, an insurance company would take. But once we hit our aggregate number, and that's what allows the fund to make a budget every year, the carrier would then pick up over whatever that aggregate number is. And that's the toughest one to get when you're self-insuring. It's almost impossible to get at the 50 to 100 life level. But when you get into that 500 to 1,000 level, you have a much broader selection of carriers that are out there. And there is success in New Jersey with health insurance funds currently. So I do expect, if there isn't an option to renew at something with a reasonable premium at the state health benefits level, you'll have many carriers that are more comfortable providing a quote because they're able to honestly quote it at what it should be its true market rate. And that's not good for the municipalities, but I wish I had a better answer, honestly, on that one. I don't know if there's going to be many other options.
So I have two funny stories. The township of Byram, their PBA prevailed in forcing the town to move from the North Jersey Employee Benefit Fund, the HIF, to the State Health Benefits Fund. It was their desire. They pushed, they prevailed. I'd love to hear what they say now with those increases, because that's a pretty funny one.
It's brutal.
Washington Township, Morris County, New Jersey, just successfully moved from State Health Benefits Fund to a different HIF. The union fought the entire way. So I just sent them a text. I said, how's your union feel now?
Yeah.
Because they really gave them a hard time about the move.
Right. The leverage that they have is only if is contingent upon the surviving of the state health benefits plan. If at any point that's not an option to renew, that leverage completely goes away. But there's never been an option if we were going to try to start a HIF and I needed to get to what the true rates would be, and let's say they were 20 or 25% higher. There's no world where you would ever leave to go do all of that work just to pay more money than what your state plan renewal would be. So in this instance that we're talking about, it really doesn't happen unless there is the worst case scenario at the state plan level or an increase that's so large that it effectively does the same thing as getting the rates into what would be the true market value of them.
So Gio, there's a question about, have counties considered opening up enrollments to their municipalities? So how many counties are still on the state health benefits plan? Because there's a number.
I don't believe there's many. I know that the county of Hunterdon left, I think in November, I want to say of 2024.
They self-insured.
Yeah, and they're very similar to just a large employer that is in your area. The county itself, if they self-insure something, they can join your HIF no different than any other entity. But if they are in a completely different geographic region, then you stand to either benefit or subsidize based off of who has the higher healthcare costs in that area. So I think it's fantastic. The more lives that you can get into the plan, it's easier for us to accurately predict what the aggregate number is going to look like every year. And it's easier for us to give more pinpoint accurate rates. But they are similar to any other entity, just larger in size. And it's more than likely, if they're running well and they're self-insured on their own, that they would continue doing that and really not open it up for the potential of it having a problem if I was giving them a recommendation.
Well, that was the question is, have we thought about, helping the municipalities out?
Yeah.
We're self-funded. I have 3,500, we call them belly buttons. So we cover that many people. So we're a credible source. Yeah. Our increase this year was in the 3%.
So if I brought you a 135% loss ratio, what would you say?
I'd make them underwrite on their own. There's no way. Why would I drag down what we've achieved with somebody else's bad losses? Not that it's their fault, but they carry some bad losses. And
you're exactly right.
I wouldn't go to a community rating. It would have to be underwritten, each one on their own.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you can still get the benefits of that by, let's say, one of the high funds that exist right now. They purchase a lot of their aggregate stop loss as a larger unit. And then they just have these local, regional, municipal HIFs. And you can still get a lot of the benefits of that larger purchasing power as a result of it. But there are reasons to have specific differences and nuances in a regional setting if you are, close in proximity to each other that do make sense, that aren't, really available to other parts of the state.
Right. That's like the BMed is the Bergen County one. The North Jersey is a little bit of a mishmash of several counties. There's the South Jersey. I think there's an Ocean one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they are geographically located, and you're right. That's how they should attract each other, is by those. But a community rating for a health insurance fund, I still think is crazy, because what's the incentive for that town to make changes to their own plan design?
Zero incentive. Outside of goodwill, there's no incentive.
So that then, back to the county question, we're still subject to the same caps that the towns are. So if we start taking on those additional losses, it puts us underwater.
Right.
Gio, I'm just going to jump in. We did have a poll relating to what Jason mentioned before, which was a small town HIF. So this next question is, would your municipality be interested in exploring a joint health insurance fund with other small towns? I'll give you guys a moment and then share the responses.
There might be a question that pops into some of the administrators' heads on, well, I like my risk manager, I like my broker. At no point do I have any desire to get this off the ground and restrict access to any broker or risk manager that's willing to do the work to get a group in there. This is going to be one of those instances where if this is a need, then it's kind of all hands on deck inside of my industry. We don't really compete much against each other at that point because it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much that has to be done in a short period of time. I'll be completely frank, getting this HIF off the ground for a 1/1 effective date would be tough to do if we started today doing it. It'll be tougher as every day that goes by because we're going to run into the issue where you're going to look at let's say a 1/1 effective date as your potential leaving. And let's say there's a 25% increase coming up. You're going to have a couple of groups that are going to say, well, I couldn't get into the other HIFs that already exist because it didn't make sense money-wise, but now 115% it makes sense because I'm looking at down the barrel of $1.25. I'm going to do that. And that's the path of least resistance. So our goal is to provide that path of least resistance with the best long-term outcome potentially. And because they can only take certain amounts, and it's assuming they don't increase the caps on new business, that would be the upside to being able to get into one where you are comfortable with the rate that you're taking because you know that the only other option is something that is outlandish or not available anymore.
Great, thank you. You should see those results now.
Yeah, makes sense.
Great.
And we had a couple other questions. We had one in the chat. Are the painful increases to the state health benefit program a leading indicator or a lagging indicator to increases that HIFs are seeing?
So the HIFs are a bit more mobile. So most of the time, the township administrators are the fund commissioners there. So they're able to have monthly meetings with fund executive and professionals that are giving them information on that monthly meeting. Where if you watch the state, the committee, the planning committee, they don't meet as frequently. And generally, some of that information is a bit old. Insurance by nature is a lagging indicator of the broader marketplace, mainly because they sell things in 1-year contracts. So by the time they can change their price, most of the world has already passed them. And that's why you'll see increases on the insurance side typically be a lagging indicator. But the schools health insurance funds are able to give pretty accurate budget numbers. And same thing with the municipal funds as well. They're able to give accurate budget numbers during the time that you do your budgets, which I find to be incredibly valuable. Whereas with the state plan, it's mostly guesswork for us. And we hope that the numbers that are on the mid-year review are remotely reasonable. But you're going to get better, clearer information from a health insurance fund. And if it performs well, the money gets retained and stays with the members.
So it makes you wonder, there were several years in a row where the State Health Benefits Fund gave out 0% increases trying to entice towns into the program.
It should not have done that.
Did they create their own problem trying to entice more people in? And then in addition to that, the state also did the best practices checklist, which you got a negative score for not being part of state health benefits.
Yes. Part of some of those years, particularly the one that was, I believe, negative or at 0 was tied to the governor's election. And I think that is a common occurrence that you see either the pushing of whatever the kicking of the can down the road to the next fund year during those election years. I'm curious to see what will ultimately happen this year with the governor not being able to run for re-election, being somebody new either instance. But there were years on the school side that they gave a premium holiday. They didn't make anybody pay, I think in February of 2020 or 2021. That was foolish. They gave a 0% when they were looking, the Aon wanted to give at least 7 to 9%, and they gave out a 0%. And then there were some years where they were effectively robbing from the retirees to fund those robust plan parts for another year, whether it be the higher amounts that they were reimbursing on chiropractors or physical therapy, or the higher benchmarks that they were using on the out-of-network reimbursement.
It's funny, as Whitman, her legacy was the downfall of pension funds. So is Murphy's legacy the downfall of the state health benefits fund?
Yeah, in my opinion, it will be. I don't think we'll know how bad it is until he's out already. But yeah, I don't see how it survives, honestly, in its current state without a major change to the plan design itself.
Giovanni, you mentioned premium holidays. I know the state health benefits program gave out some premium holidays a
Mhm.
long time ago. But it was really just a delay in that the town would
The
owe the money if they ever left the fund.
Yeah,
Do you
the
know if those are
school,
still there? If
there
that liability
was,
is still there?
I had to deal with one, yes. But the state every once in a while, if it was a big enough employer, they would allow a payment to be missed sometimes if it was a district that was in financial peril. They would allow that to happen and basically just said, if you ever leave, you have to pay it at the time. Well, we removed a large group. This is 2018. We had to build in that price into our figure because we knew we had, I think it was 2 months actually that we had to repay back at that number. The schools did it, I think in 2021, it was February, I want to say, and it never needed to happen because the schools had already finished their budgets by that point for the most part, and they didn't need to have that as found money. It would have been much better served going to the claim stabilization fund.
Gio, don't you think it's like some of the joint insurance funds let you delay or defer by 2 months and it becomes that anchor that makes it harder and harder for you to get out of the situation,
Always, always.
right? It's not a golden parachute, it's a noose.
Yes, exactly right.
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
Is it beneficial for towns to stick it out in state health benefits plan to see that premium design change before they move out, just because of equal to or better than language in their contracts, where essentially we go through some sort of hard changes through the state health benefits plan, so that then we don't have to deal with offering that same level of coverage if we go into a different plan? Like, for example, what the school did with the GLP-1s, if the state plan was to do that, now we no longer have sort of that issue to deal with if we're moving into a different plan and maintaining what the current premium or what the current policy looks like.
I would say yes, only if the state wasn't the taker of last resort. Because it's always a taker of last resort and the way it's set up now, if they required you to do a 3-year commitment or they prevented you from coming in for 3 to 5 years, I would change my mind there as well. In the property and casualty world, and even in the school's health insurance world, if you leave the shift, you can't come back in for 2 years. So they won't let you come back over there. In the school board world and on the municipal side, they keep you in for 3 years so that they can buy their reinsurance at a cheaper rate, knowing that they have commitments for a 3-year period. The state plan has none of that, and they have to take you no matter how poorly you're running at the time. So if you have somebody that's coming on that is going to be on a maintenance medication forever, and you're going to run at over 100% for the next couple of years, if it's a dependent, there's no way for them to ever properly underwrite that. They're just always a year behind once they see the claims for a certain period of time, and then they react to it. Whereas when you're underwriting something, when it's coming in, you can see it immediately and you then get to say no to it. And as a result, that program can survive. Their method of underwriting ultimately always fails at some point because of adverse selection. So they have to change how they allow people to come in and out if they have any hope of continuing to do so.
Yeah, a couple other questions from Charles Schlager.
Mhm.
If state health benefits implodes, what would be the impact and or course of action for employer to deal with contractual commitment to provide retirees in the state plan? For example, Direct 15. And also, what is the impact of this situation with state health benefits on the 330 plan?
So on the specific plan themselves, I would have to read your individual contract. My thought always is that if the state plan ceases to exist, there is going to be I think that your attorney is going to have written out for the renegotiation of that contract at that point. And if it doesn't exist, I don't really know what you would end up doing. You'd have to go and find equal to or better than in a HIF that you're creating with the goal of the creation to not spend as much money as we were spending with our other super benefit rich plan. But I recognize that if you're in the middle of a commitment on the bargaining side, that there's really not a lot of wiggle room there. I would go take a look at that of your collective bargaining language and see if there is a built-in for the failure of the state health benefits plan, or if it didn't exist the same way. Because when we would have legislation change, like for Chapter 44, Chapter 78, it became the new law. So it superseded the collective bargaining agreement when that legislation was passed.
Well, wouldn't you think if the state health benefits fund goes away, that the equal to or better than is nothing?
I would agree.
There's nothing to compare to then.
I would agree. There's no equal to or better than the state plan anymore. And I think what their goal would be to do is to somehow either form the state's own reinsurance kind of company for these HIFs that are going about, where they can remove themselves from it entirely, except for managing some of the really poor performing ones that can't even get a HIF off the ground for at least a couple of years. I think that they would probably get into that type of a business for at least a little bit. That's what they had talked about in what the options would be. One of them was providing some form of reinsurance backed by the state for some of the HIFs that were having a tough time getting off the ground.
So Jim Burnett likes your logic, Mr. Reinhardt.
I see that.
Yeah, it would be nice.
So John and Jason and maybe Gabby, we know that the Division of Local Government Services allows a dedication by rider for self-insurance for property and casualty. Would they allow something for health benefits?
They do.
Having a few bad years?
They do. And actually, Bergen actually was formed improperly. We just cured that in the last year.
Mhm.
So we have every one of our insurances now under the dedication by rider.
Okay.
But we went so much as to form the self-insurance fund, which has its own set of commissioners.
Yeah, I was looking for their share from their membership in a HIF, similar to a JIF, trying to level out their increases.
You mean with the Nexus, just kind of like the EPL exposure, Bud?
Mm-hmm.
So what Bud's talking about is on the EPL exposure, you buy what the first 20,000 is cost share at 20-something% up to 70,000 per claim. We were successful in arguing with the division. It was Jerry Sineski was there at the time, that we are self-insuring our own component. That's our SIR on the claim. They allowed us to form a dedication by rider for SIR only, not premium. And it was very specific as the qualification on that dedication by rider, which yes, you can do that. The other thing that you can do, and most people don't know, is that you can issue a refunding ordinance to fund your deficit with debt. It's a 5-year issue. It's taxable, so it's not pleasant, but it is another way to get around some of the deficits that are out there.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Well, thank you very much, Giovanni and Jason. I appreciate it. It was great information and a good discussion, and thanks everyone for the questions that were posed.
Excellent.
And
Thank
Jim
you,
Burnett's
everyone.
comment too.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to hop off and go back to the regular work day, but you guys keep on. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Take care, Giovanni.
Thank you.
Easy.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Bud, did you want to take a small break?
If you want.
And I think we need to shift up the order. Otherwise, we're going to lose Mayor Wilsusen.
Okay,
If we can put them next,
that's fine.
we're going to push Gabby back a little bit. And
Sounds good.
all right, so you guys want like a 5-10 minute break?
10 minutes?
All right, hold
10,
on.
20, we'll come back.
Great.
think we hit that 10:20 mark.
Hi.
Morning, Deb.
Hi, John.
Hey, Mayor, how are you?
Good. How are you?
All right.
Morning, everyone. Hey, Eric.
Hello. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you. Hey, Deb.
Can get my computer to sit evenly here.
So John, you're going to do the introductions?
I am. So what's funny is I met Mayor Wilsusen for the first time at the Pompton Queen Diner in Pequannock.
You did.
He was mayor-elect and looking to hire a new administrator.
I was.
And that's
Yep.
where we found Deb shortly thereafter.
That's right. It's been downhill ever since. Now she's damaged goods.
Oh my goodness.
As you can see, they make a great team. So I'm going to start with introductions.
This started out this way right from the beginning. Ask him what I did. Tell him what I did to you in your interview. I asked you if you like to go to Byram Cove and you vote.
Yes, you did.
So that is Mayor Wilsusen. Eric is currently serving his second four-year term as mayor of Jefferson Township, where he has lived his entire life. A lifelong resident of Lake Shawnee section, Eric lives in the township with his wife of 29 years and their two daughters. He retired in 2016 as the deputy chief of police in Jefferson Township after 31 years of service. He now serves as the director of child and youth protection for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Patterson. He currently serves as president of the Lake Shawnee Club, commissioner and Morris County representative on the Lake Patcon Commission, and trustee at both Our Lady Star of the Sea Roman Catholic Church and the Mars Prevention is Key. His past involvement includes service as chief and life member of the Jefferson Township Fire Company, president of the Jefferson Township High School Girls Soccer Booster Club and PTSA, and vice president of Jefferson Youth Soccer. In 2014, he was honored as Mayor Citizen of the Year in recognition of his dedication to community. I think his involvement with all those programs might have helped with him become mayor too.
Kind of helped a little bit with elections.
So Deb, I first met in the early 2000s when she was still working in Newton.
Mm-hmm.
That was a long time ago.
Mhm.
Was.
So Deb Millikin, and she's also a Lockwood, which most people don't know.
Yeah.
So Deb Millikin is currently the Township Business Administrator and Qualified Purchasing Agent for the Township of Jefferson. She has been there for the past 6 years. She and Eric started together. She graduated from the American University with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and also obtained her Master's of Arts in Leadership and Public Administration from Centenary College. She worked for the town of Newton as the Community Development Director and Deputy Town Manager for 18 years. She also worked for Wantage Township as the Administrator and Municipal Clerk for 2.5 years before accepting the Jefferson position. In addition to her role as Business Administrator in a township with over 125 employees, she holds certifications as a QPA and RMC through the state of New Jersey. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Deb and Eric because it really is their show and their vision and their baby. That's how this all started.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate it. And what was important to me is coming in as a mayor. As you hear, I've been in public service for quite a long time. So the knowing the ins and outs of municipality is certainly was the easy part. As coming in as a new mayor and the previous mayor had been in office for 20 years, there wasn't a lot of change going on in our town at that time. So I was kind of somewhat the change agent. I met John through Cervantes, along with John Eskelson, and they got me started with my search for a new administrator, which brought us to Debbie. Had 20 people apply and narrowed it down to 5 for me, and Debbie was the winner. And but coming in as the mayor, what was important to me was we had no plan. There was really nothing in place as far as strategic planning, SWOT analysis, all those tools that I think are important for a municipality. I'm a certified public manager myself from my days as an administrator in the police department. So these things coming in as mayor were really, really important to me. And, I was happy to have Debbie on board. Jon Rheinhardt. I actually met John also as well in one of your budgeting classes. And if anybody knows Jon Rheinhardt, he is the spreadsheet guru, the king of kings when it comes to spreadsheets. and he wowed me in one of those seminars, and I was glad to know that he was on board with Cervantes, and helped us tremendously with our 10-year strategic plan. So that has been a tool that has just been extremely important to us as a municipality. I know, we're all required to have at least a 6-year plan. We had no year plan. Coming into this, I had a year-to-year plan was the standard in the prior administration. So to me, really going forward, having a 10-year plan, we use it to this day. It's a great tool in budgeting, helps us with council, getting projects and things done. When the question comes up, can we kick it down the road? The answer is look at the 10-year plan, because you know what's coming, and you know that if you're going to kick it down the road, that guess what? There's things behind it. And it's really just proven to be a valuable tool. We had 2 new council people come on board this year, and I just keep referring back. I get tired of saying it. Strategic plan, strategic plan, strategic plan. And then Debbie, of course, was instrumental in helping us, along with Marianne Eskelsen as well, in getting our very first SWOT analysis done for our township. And again, just another great planning tool. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie, and they're going to carry on. So good luck, everybody. Enjoy your training. And John, thank you all. Thank you so much for all your help. You've been very valuable to us, and you're always a great resource. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Mayor. So as the mayor said, his goal was to get a 10-year capital plan in place. And as we started to look ahead over the next 10 years, one of the critical components that came into play was we really needed to take a look at where the town is and where we were going. And specifically, that's how we started to plan the SWOT analysis that we did. The SWOT analysis covers your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we took 24 department heads over off-site one day, and basically as a group came up with what our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities and threats were. And then from there broke off into groups of public safety, public works, administration, finance, and then also looked at engineering and land use, and came back and saw what their SWOT items were as well. And from there, that's how kind of we started to figure out the future for Jefferson and started to come up with our better capital plan moving forward.
You took the components of the outcome of the SWOT analysis, and then used that to come up with what your needs were.
Yes.
And then we connected the theory to the application and how to carry that out going forward. I think it's important.
Yes. No, that's exactly what we had to do.
So Deb, you're driving, so tell me when you want me to move slides.
You can move them if you want. So our SWOT recap, as John shows here, our biggest investment that we noticed that we were lax on was our infrastructure. We're 42 square miles, the township of Jefferson. We have basically 2 distinct sides, the Lake Opakong side and the Milton side. And we needed to focus on how we could get more infrastructure improvements done. We were not spending a lot on roads or, utilities, things of that nature. So we needed to focus on how could we get good prices for the use of our infrastructure. And one of the things that we started to think about was getting our projects completed early. So going out to bid for asphalt and paving projects as soon as our capital was adopted, and getting those bids in so we got a better rate, for our asphalt pricing. We also looked at, just different avenues of what types of facility improvements we might need. There was the talk about a police department, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And we had to do a police addition onto our existing facilities. So, we started to really look at what we needed to do to make the town a little bit more, I guess, comprehensive, that we were addressing everything in place at the time.
So Deb, you know the origin of SWOT? I felt it necessary to look it up. It was Albert Humphrey. He was a business and management consultant. He developed a SWOT analysis while working for the Stanford Research Institute in the 1960s and 70s. except the initial term was soft. It was satisfactory, opportunity, fault, and threat, which eventually evolved into SWOT. You done with the slide?
Perfect. Very interesting. Yes.
Okay.
So next, as we looked at our opportunities and threats, one of our biggest threats that Jefferson has faced is in 2004 was the legislation known as Highlands that came into play. And Highlands had a huge impact on the township of Jefferson. We have 88% of our land of Jefferson is in the preserved portion of Highlands, which has an economic effect on the township from we can't get more ratables in. It affects the potential expansion of development in town. Literally the only section of the town that actually is in the what they call quote unquote call the planned portion is literally our 15 corridor to the Lake Hopatcong side where more of our commercial business is. The commercial businesses in Berkshire Valley Road here in Jefferson are unfortunately in the preserved area, so there can't be a lot of expansion. So that definitely has had a major threat on the township from the legislative end. And we are looking at trying to come up with ways to try to do economic opportunity areas, working with Highlands. We're currently going through some studies on that. But, ultimately, I think our threats are, unfortunately, because of Highlands, it's had a budgetary constraint on the township. And another reason why we really needed to look at our capital plan to try to figure out ways to fund these programs and not go into even more debt over time.
So we talked in the last session about the legacy of Whitman and now Murphy. I think McGreevy that's his legacy was the Highlands.
Yes.
Right. He devalued all of the northwestern side of the state
Mm-hmm.
to preserve the water, which was a good thing. But you're right that the threat is the regulatory and legislative, I would say, oversight that they continue to task us with things that cost us money without the ability to afford it or to change our caps.
No, it's the truth. And one of our biggest taxable properties is the Newark watershed. And we keep going into tax appeals and they've dropped the watershed's value, which, also has an impact on us as well. And again, it all kind of ties back into all of this legislation that was put in place.
Which is interesting because Newark takes your water and then resells it at a profit.
Yes.
But yet they want tax exempt status.
Yep. So makes it interesting. All right. So kind of looking at, our long range plan over, the 10 years and how we kind of came to do this process, we'll kind of go through in a couple of the other slides that we have on here. But our ultimate goal was investing in the future for the township. And it definitely had our departments really thinking outside the box and looking at equipment, back in 2020, 2021, equipment prices were a lot different than they are, say, today. And, COVID played a role in some of this as well. And, so we've had to adjust some of the numbers over time, but I think it gave each department the ability to really look at what their future needs were and how, what the truck turnover was for my DPW, our fire trucks. I mean, as soon as Eric was elected mayor, within the first, I think it was budget process we went through, we had 2 fire trucks that needed to be replaced that were not expected to be replaced. So we really had to work with all the various departments to really focus on what type of equipment they needed at that year versus the next 10 years and really space it out. And we've worked very hard to try to continue to justify what equipment's needed and what's needed for the future to help, again, to continue to provide our projects, that we can implement, but also try to take into account not going into as much debt either. So
I'm just going to jump in with our first poll, John and Deb, before we move on. You guys should see this question. Does your community have a long-range capital or debt plan beyond the state requirements? And then I'll share the results in a few moments. Just a reminder, everyone, the polls are for credits, so make sure if you are looking for your education credits, you're completing these polls. Okay. All right, and you should see those results now. So it looks like mostly no, but a mix of yes and I'm not sure. Thank you.
Interesting.
So the categories that are listed, well, we're going to list them later on slide 14, which you can't see the numbers, but we'll make sure that you know when we get to that point.
You want to go to the next slide, John?
Absolutely. So obviously we all don't have crystal balls on our desks and don't know what the future is really going to bring. So what we did when we were going through this process is we came up with some basic assumptions in order to come up with a meaningful model for us to present. But more importantly, when you're done with the model, it's important to not let it collect dust on a shelf, pick it up as Deb and Eric have been doing and refreshing it every year so that they know where they stand and adjusting for current values. And you'll see in a little bit, we were able to establish what they could afford each year. And then their plan is to prioritize based upon what they can afford. So it's a moving, living model. But if you think about the timing of this plan, they did this plan in 2019, and we're implementing it in 2020 as the pandemic set in. And that really is an issue. So I got to ask, how did you react to the pandemic, and did it impact your plan at all?
I think it did impact our plan from the degree that maybe some of the costs went up, from unfortunately with the supply and demand. One of the examples I can think of is we needed to purchase a new ambulance for our rescue squad on the lakeside. And it was interesting because we had gotten, the bid together, had awarded the contract, and then all of a sudden we started getting hit with, the cost of steel went up, so we got to do a change order for this. And I'm going to tell you, it took the ambulance 4 years to get built. And we saw various impacts. I mean, when it came to certain supplies that we needed for, various activities that we did, the impact was there on, equipment and everything. But, as we went on, we adjusted it. Did we have probably a little bit more impact on the, capital debt? Yes, during COVID, but I think we've continued, and thanks, a shout out to our CFO, Bill Egan, who has always made it his goal to try to get the township to be debt free, and he has his plan in place, and we keep taking it off the rails periodically. But I think through Bill too, we've really done a good process to try to keep to the plan as best we can with everything.
You mentioned Bill. So Bill was an active participant in the formulation of this plan. I felt bad as an outsider coming in. I called him up, said, Bill, do you mind if I'm involved? He says, no, I would welcome it. So periodically, as we're developing the plan, I would meet him at J-Town Tavern. And over a beer, we would hammer out the nuances because he was familiar with everything that was going on in town. So he was the best sounding board that I could have had. But we list some of the assumptions here. We're going to go into much more detail later on in what we assumed with each category. What we had to figure out first is what they could afford. So what we did is we came up with an annual debt plan. We decided that 2019 was going to be the base year. So we started off with a debt service of almost $3 million. And we all agreed that the annual increase on that total debt service combined interest and principal was going to be 3% a year. So if you look at that last column before the gray box, it says increase year over year. So that's what the actual increases are. To the far right in the gray box is where we established what that 3% was, and the variance is in the far right box. So we could figure out how close we were, and we were plus or minus a couple $100. So that's a pretty tight margin of how we were able to manage this. Obviously, Bill's goal is to be debt free. The mayor and Deb's goal was to maintain the infrastructure. So that tug of war was very interesting to watch go on. I'm sure it still continues to go on. But
we work well together, all of us.
But we had to balance this with the existing debt and existing notes, or existing bonds and notes, which is the far left. And that's where we balanced in the future needs. And we layered in that debt service to balance around that 3% goal in the gray box. So it was a great exercise. The detail behind it is these are the amortization schedules where we went out with the existing debt on the left side. The total proposed debt is where all those boxes are to the right. So the top is the principal, the bottom is the interest, and there's another schedule that combines the two, which feeds back into the analysis. At the time, we assumed a borrowing rate of about 2.75%. Obviously, that's out the window right now, but that was just the basis for at least planning. Now we can adjust going forward. And we also assumed that everything going forward was going to be in the form of notes unless there was an opportunity to permanently finance at that time to lock in and stretch those payments out to provide some relief, then to continue on with the plan. Now, you may ask what all those boxes are at the top of the analysis. The top of the box is the first maturity. The line that you see in the middle of the box, that's the third anniversary. So on or before the third anniversary, we have to make the first legal minimum payment, which is why we made sure that we honored that through the process. The bottom line of the box was the 10th anniversary, when we had to have the note fully paid off. So we bound those so that we could visually see what our requirements were, and then we massaged the numbers. I don't want to say play. We massaged the numbers to fit in. And you'll see that at the bottom of the first couple of boxes, like in 2023, we have a heavy payoff in the later years and very light payoff. That's so we can get ahead of the existing debt that was out there and manage it and push it off. So we essentially created a non-conforming maturity schedule by just using notes and getting around the rules. But it was able to get us to where we needed to be.
John, just to add to that, it's been interesting, but I just pulled out our 2025 budget, and I think we had an assumption of, I forgot in the prior slide there, what our budget was anticipated to be. I think it was about
3.5.
3.5. So actually we did for capital this year was 4.8. However, 202,600,000 of that was bonded. 1.1 of that was funded through capital improvement fund. 326 of that was appropriated through a reappropriation ordinance. We had 305,000 in grants, and then we have a police outside kind of category that we take in where our council had adopted whenever a cop is out doing a road detail that we charge for the car. So for the first 3 hours, 4 hours, it might be $25 for that period. And then if they go above, 4 hours, it's $50 every day for the use of that car. So that's helped build up a fund. So we've been able to supply that to say, purchase a new, vehicle for the police department if it has something that's going to be a useful life of over 5 years, or help us purchase police equipment. So we had 61,000 in that. And then our open space and recreation fund covered 278,000. So it's interesting, as we've continued to change and do things, I think, and again, I give credit to Bill on this because, we had a $4.8 million capital budget this year, but only 2.6 did we borrow against, so.
But it goes back to the point of not letting that plan collect dust. You guys refresh it every year.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, we had a question that came up
Okay.
from a Jefferson Township resident who's also CFO, Bob Makis. Was the SWAT process undertaken by staff only, or did you retain services of a third-party consultant facilitator?
The SWAT itself, we had hired Civitas, which was John Eskelson and Marianne Eskelsen's company, and Marianne basically ran the SWAT for us. However, it was strictly our department heads only that participated in that. So yes, we had a third party kind of put our final synopsis together. However, it was the employees that basically created what the SWAT ended up determining.
Okay, so we'll move on. But I have in presentation mode, so I can't see questions. So if you don't mind, just keep interrupting.
I'm good at interrupting.
I know that. So here's some of the budget assumptions we came up with on the revenue side. We, the ABC and other licenses, we assumed that there was no growth. It was stagnant, and so it wasn't worth assuming that. And we did a very conservative projection of everything. Fees and permits, we assumed 2% growth. Interest and costs on taxes, 1%. Revenues, we assume, or the grants, we assume they balance each other out. There's no tax impact, so we just left them level. It didn't make sense to forecast them. UCC fees were 2%. Receipts from delinquent taxes, we said no increase. An amount to be raised by taxation is the final source of revenue to balance the budget. I didn't want to call it plug, but it was the plug. And that's how we balance it out. And again, I have to give Bill Egan credit because he's the one who had insight into the revenue categories, and we sat down to go over where we thought what was appropriate and what was not. Deb, you want to talk about health insurance first before I get going?
Yeah, no, I think, when we look at this slide, I think one of the biggest things is that our biggest investment in the township is our employees. Our employees, obviously their salary and wage, their benefits, their pensions are a huge, component into our budget. But I think health insurance costs, as we started to see, were increasing at the state level. So one of the biggest things that we kind of got ahead of the moment of the change with the state health benefits was prior to the state announcing that they were going to increase the health benefits. I think it was in 2022, that they were going to increase it pretty heavily. We had already asked for all of our loss ratios to kind of analyze if there was a better option out there for the township. So with that, we ended up applying to the North Jersey Employee Benefits Fund, the HIF, and basically worked with them and got, as we say in contracts, you have to, provide, the equivalent of what they had or better. So we worked with the HIF to get a plan together, and we ended up joining that, and we've been with them now for 3 years.
So it's funny, we talked about how the legislature keeps throwing roadblocks in front of us. So not only the State Health Benefits Fund, but they also had the cancer presumption bill that was passed back in 2019 as well, which severely impacts workers' comp. It drives those costs up. And that was it. It was presumed for a firefighter, and not that we're picking on firefighters, but this is just very expensive, established a presumption that certain cancers diagnosed in firefighters are occupational diseases, meaning they are presumed to be work-related and eligible for workers' compensation. The presumption applies to firefighters that under the age of 76 years old with more than 7 years of active service. And they're saying that the cancer is caused by heat, radiation, or known or suspected carcinogens. Again, it's not a knock against firefighters. It's just an extremely expensive decision by the legislature, which is not funded by anything else and no relief in the caps to pay for it. So when we looked at the appropriation side of the budget, we came up with some more assumptions that they might have to be tweaked now, but salary and wages, 2%, other expenses, 1%. So we're suppressing some of the growth over there. That might not be realistic at this point. Insurance, we've beat up over the last presentation and now this one. So I think we've said enough. PFRS, it's interesting because we assumed 32.37, because how could it go any higher than 32.37? And it's now at 37%. And in the next presentation, when we talked about negotiations, you'll see that trend line keeps going up, but I'll let Gabi talk about that one. PERS, we talked about a 5% growth each year. I didn't look at the rate of where that would be from there, but it's probably not keeping up with where we are. Although this year, the PERS contribution rate went down. First positive sign we've seen in a long time. Capital Improvement Fund, because we were growing the debt at 3% a year, the total debt exposure, we felt it was prudent for 6% growth. And this is actually Bill Egan speaking, because he wanted to be debt free. So he wanted to put more in than we needed. It's also there for that oh no moment when, Murphy's Law comes in and there's nothing is planned for, but you have extra down payment money that you use to pay for that. The debt service is tied completely into that prior plan that you saw. So it's a function of what happened there that rolls into the budget. And you'll see that we did a budget projection as well. In reserve for uncollected taxes, we maintained at a level 2% of the levy, not a 2% growth. I think it was 2% of the levy. And we also did, we calculated out, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, the projected tax rates, the impact on average residential property, but we will get to those next. Anything else on there, Deb?
No, I think you hit it all.
Okay. So here's where we did the 5-year tax rate projection. We made a bunch of assumptions here as well, and we have a whole page that listed all of our assumptions. I didn't show that here, but we've got this really long list of everything that we assumed. The assessed value, we decided to grow that every year, and it used the prior 3 years growth, the average, to project forward, and it sustained that growth. Being in the Highlands, I don't know if that's realistic, but I think they've been able to manage that pretty well. It then came up with the distribution of taxes. It automatically calculated the reserve for uncollected taxes for them based upon the levy. It came down to the rates down below on an average residential property, which starting in 2018 and going out to the year 2025, and we were able to manage that. So the total tax increase on an average residential property over the next 6 years was to be a total of $385.42. Now, this is not just the capital and debt. This is the entire budget, or about $64 a year. So I don't know, how did we fare on that?
I think we had a couple of, I think unfortunately, like we said, with, COVID, I think we definitely had some impacts. But we've stayed somewhat, I think, within this, within these ranges. We might be over a little bit, but I think, I think this year I think we were a little bit lower than last year. So, and again, that's all thanks to good planning that, we had. One of our biggest things was our investments, our long-term investments were, we got over $1 million in surplus, or not surplus, fund balance.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So $1 million in fund balance because of our investments, which was huge. So that was a big contributor to our budget for this year, which was nice.
I think the focus from the beginning was on the impact on an average residential property, so we didn't break the backs to the residents in going through this process.
Yeah. And also the other thing that's played a role is we used to do a rolling reassessment here in Jefferson. However, with a or I guess it was a court case that came out, the township broke the town into quadrants. So we had 4 sections and we were not doing the annual reassessment appropriately. We were only doing a quarter of the town, and that helped us. However, we went back to the traditional way that, so we didn't continue to do the rolling reassessment. So I think that's had an impact as well, because we had to go back to, I guess, the traditional way of, doing the assessments and wait for a reval, which we just got noticed on a couple months ago.
Fun.
Oh, yes.
So here's where we came up with the 5-year tax rate projection, which is how we established the impact on an average residential property as well. I'm sorry, next slide. This is just a summary of a whole lot of underlying data. The revenues are broken down into probably a 6-page sheet with a lot of detail, and each one has its own assumption where we go. The appropriations, again, the same thing. Depending upon the type of appropriation, we would have tweaked it and come up with an overall average. But to the far right, you can see that the blended average over the next several years of what we assumed. And again, that's probably a 20-page document that supports these right here. Mm-hmm. Then it came down to our overall budget, which then drove the revenue side, right? Because the amount to be raised by taxation is the plug number to make everything else balance. But again, we measure that against the impact on an average residential property. So there's tons and tons of data that Deb and Bill have now that they can play with all the time. But we essentially did a 5-year projection of their budget with 2020 as the adopted base year going forward.
John, we just have a quick poll relating to this slide. The question is, does your community prepare multi-year budget projections? Get your responses in, and then I'll share the results.
Now, we also had a comment about the pension percentage escalating each year, that the model would be short on appropriations.
It would. But again, that's why it's a living document and why they can adjust every year. At the time, we didn't have a crystal ball that tells where it's going to go. Mm-hmm. And there's constant pressure from the law enforcement community to weaken the restoration of the COLA on retirees, which you can't blame them. They want to get an increase, but it's still not adequately funded yet. It's still in the 70s. It's by statute, it has to hit 80% to be considered adequately funded before they restore the COLA. So, our response to that legislative committees I sit on is, why would you want to break it before you fix it? Let's fix it first, get it back to where it's adequately funded, and then go from there and then restore it. No, that's a great response. I didn't expect 51%.
Thank you.
The ones that don't know, you should probably go back and ask. We done on this one? Yeah.
I think so.
So the next one was interesting because we also calculated, and it's a rough calculation, the levy cap implications of this plan. You can see at the bottom of the year 2021, we have a negative. We went over cap. But if you look at the year before that, we were under cap by 521,000 and change. So we weren't worried about that 1 year blip because we knew we could balance it out with what we had in cap bank. But it also shows that we are looking forward to see what the impact of this was and how it impacted the town and the budget overall, because we don't want a spike and not be able to deal with that spike.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we made sure that was known up front that there were some pressures. So this is the one we talked about. This is slide 14. These are the categories that you broke all of your improvements into.
Mm-hmm. So we had our facilities category, which was about 9.1% of our total, capital allocation. Our vehicles are a big investment for the township because we maintain our vehicles. I have in-house mechanics. I have 3 that maintain our vehicles and do a really good job of maintaining them. So our vehicles, we get a lot of life out of them. However, we feel there is a need there to rotate them a little bit sooner than maybe most municipalities, would. We don't run them into the ground because we looked that there is a value if we auction them off and we can get some revenue in from the auction. So our vehicles make up about 30.3%. And again, that's all of our vehicles, our fire trucks, our DPW, our parks, our water sewer, our police vehicles. Equipment, that's just our normal equipment that we typically utilize with, our roads, our water. I mean, our utility obviously is separate from this because we have a separate utility, but this all kind of plays a role. Our fields, our playgrounds, we have a huge recreation department, and we do a lot we have a camp that we run every year. So, focusing on what type of upgrades we need to do, as well as, our playgrounds. We've been successful in the past couple of years of getting recreation money through DCA to do some big improvements to our playgrounds, which has been great. Our roads, obviously us being 42 square miles, our roads are a huge investment. It's about 36.5% of our investment. And we've gotten creative, and I'll talk about that, I think, in our next slide, how we've gotten creative with our roads a little bit. Guide rail signage, it's typical. We actually have our own sign company in-house. So we actually create a lot of our signage for our roads through our department in DPW. And our technology, we have a bunch of buildings here that all have computers, and our IT is fantastic with making sure that everything's backed up onto our servers. I mean, we have a separate section just for the police department itself, but our technology is always changing and always advancing. And again, I'll probably hit on one of those topics too as we get into this a little bit more into this.
So for people that don't know Jefferson, the vehicles might seem excessive, but Jefferson being 42 square miles with 2 climates, I'm going to call it, the lake climate and then the Milton climate, because one could be nice and sunny day and Milton would be snow in a snowstorm. So how many road miles do you have? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think I want to say I do know it. I think it's like 140 miles. I think that's low, but it's about it. We have a lot. There's so many different ways. But I think also too, one of the things that people don't know is one of the second highest point in New Jersey is here in Jefferson and Malin Dickinson. And like John says, I mean, I drive across Weldon Road every day here in town. I live on the lakeside, and it's amazing. I hit Weldon Road and I hit Malin Dickinson, and there might be more snow there than there is around the entire town. So it's very interesting.
Bill Egan corrected us. He says he thinks it's closer to 200 miles of roads in Jefferson.
What did he say?
200 miles.
200.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
So Deb, how were you able to prioritize what projects were funded first? Do you have a ranking system or some other method?
We didn't really do a ranking system. I think what we did was, you know, the 10-year plan really put into place that picture of what we were looking for at each year. We've adjusted it on occasion depending on what a need might be. Say we didn't anticipate having a major, you know, issue with like our loader, but it turns out our loader, you know, had a major issue. You know, we've adjusted it a little bit to impact, you know, if a piece of equipment isn't doing what we thought it was going to do. I mean, for example, I have 2 ladder trucks here in the township of Jefferson, and this was not anticipated. We had a 1990 ladder that's with our company one on the Milton side, that's 31 years old, and they figured they could get another 5 years out of it. Well, that wasn't the case. And then on the lake side, I had another fire truck that was 20 years old and had a frame issue and stuff. So last year we ended up having to change up the entire fire department side and just do an appropriation specific for ladder trucks. But the one thing we did do, we got creative. We didn't do where you go out and, you know, put a spec together, go out for a specific truck. We actually decided to do off the line because the companies do have vehicles that they do off the line. And we probably saved a decent amount of money by doing that. I mean, it was a $3.2 million investment. And now I have 2 new ladder trucks. But, you know, again, that's where we say that this capital plan adjusts based off of what our needs are, but also, you know, we now have to plan out for these ladder trucks in the future. But, you know, was it something we wanted to invest in at the time? No, but we adjusted it and figured out how to do it. And again, you know, Bill, I give Bill a ton of credit because we do everything with short term, you know, with 10-year notes. We try very hard not to go into long-term, you know, debt payments.
I'm sure you didn't want to finance 2 trucks in 1 year. That was not part of the plan.
No, it was not.
Murphy's Law, something's gonna pop up. What will go wrong can go wrong, or what can go wrong will go wrong.
And the interesting part with that was, I think our first company's order went in July 1st. And then our second company's order went in, I think it was September 1st. And the second company got their ladder truck in November of last year. And finally, the company on this side that had their order in July, their ladder truck arrives on Monday, actually.
Wet down.
Are there wet down parties that we're going to get invited to?
I believe the one for company one is August 16th, so everybody can put that on their calendar.
So Deb, there's a question that from one of the people in the audience is, are open space funds collected used to maintain recreation and fields as well as the programs?
Yes, I mean, we utilize our recreation funds to fund, you know, various items related to the camp, to the parks, to the fields. I mean, we have a lot of fields here in Jefferson because of our size. And, you know, our guys do take a lot of pride in that. But depending on what we have to do for the year, like I can pull it out right now. I can tell you what we've utilized it for this year. This year we're utilizing it. We do have a truck that we need to purchase for the Parks Department. So we're utilizing some of that money for that. We have to upgrade a sign at one of our parks that's very outdated. You know, we've replaced, some appliances in our refreshment stands that are utilized. Also, we've been doing fountains for a couple of the lakes that we have that we are responsible for, as well as we've done some air conditioning replacements with the money for the buildings and stuff of that nature. So all of the funds that we utilize for open space go directly back to the camp, to the recreation fields, to the parks, all of that. So
I just realized he's one of your residents.
yes.
So I hope that's a good answer.
I hope he likes the answer. I think I've met with him a couple of times.
You might have. So before Deb gets going on these, as we previously discussed, the capital needs of Jefferson Township were massive and couldn't be achieved all at once, which is why we identified the parameters on how much the township was willing to grow that budget for the debt service to accommodate what they needed. I don't know, Deb, you have any more to say here?
I don't think so. I
mean,
think
it really was taking it from theory to application and then maintenance, which is unique. That you truly have proactively managed that plan.
we've tried to.
Not easy.
No, it's not.
Here's your big slide.
These are some of my big ones. I mean, the big one for us obviously was our roads and our facilities in need of repair and upgrade. One of our biggest investments is our roads. And as Bill said, we have almost 200 miles worth of roads that we maintain. And, our road investment is very high. And prior to Eric and myself coming in, we weren't investing a lot into the roads. So what we started looking at was one of the things our supervisors brought in was this use of cape sealing. I don't know if anybody's ever heard this. Basically, we take a road that's been maybe paved about 5 to 6 years ago, and then we put this cape seal top coating. It's almost like I almost attribute it to how you do your driveways every couple of years, you seal them. It almost provides like a seal on top of the road to help get more useful life out of it. And so we started implementing that. So we had an earmark for money to do that on newly paved roads. And then what we also started to do was focus on where we could get our road project up a little bit more. And I know the first year, I think we exceeded what the town had ever done the year prior. And Bill had faith in us to do this, and it's worked out very well. And another partner with all of this is we have New Jersey Natural Gas here putting in gas mains all over town. And our engineer at the time, Ed Hack, had met with New Jersey Natural and basically said, listen, you guys pave a half of a side of a road once you're done. But he goes, how could we work this that basically you pave a curb to a curb and we'll take on another road, but you take this on and it will work as kind of like a share. And so New Jersey Natural always said they would give us money for half of the road improvement. Well, we started to work as a group, and it's amazing. It's worked out fantastic because what we've done is we've taken on some more road projects that we probably wouldn't have done. And New Jersey Natural has now agreed to pave curb to curb on roads because what we've worked with them is our paving schedule. So we let New Jersey Natural know, hey, these are the list of roads that we're looking to pave this year. Do you have any gas main projects coming forward? And if they say yes, then we adjust our plan. And so one of the things, we have a huge community here on the lakeside called Lake Forest, and they've had gas mains installed over the past probably 3 to 4 years. And with now everybody's pretty much connected, and it's amazing, but that development itself would have cost the town a decent amount of money to pave, and New Jersey Natural is going to pave that entire area curb to curb. And we've been able to add some other roads on this side that the gas company has done and pave. So it's been a very good partnership, and we've definitely gotten creative with, as we continue to go for our road projects. Another big upgrade that was needed when I was first brought in was our police department addition, and they had gone out for bids, and this has been a 20-year project. I think Eric was probably one of the initial people when it first happened, our mayor, because he was a police officer for 30 years prior to taking on the mayor role. And, so the addition came in a lot lower than, or a lot higher than we had funds for. So we upped our number for the police edition and got bids in. We got a lot of bids, and it actually did come in, within budget once we upped the budget a little bit. I think originally they had about 750, and we ended up creating another, I think we added another 500,000 to the project. But it was because we were busting at the seams. I have 37 sworn police officers, and they had a very small area that they could work, and we didn't have a locker room to accommodate them and stuff. So, but we were able to accomplish that, which has been huge too.
Hey, Deb, since you mentioned your camp, do you want to talk as a shameless plug for your annual, isn't the haunted,
Oh, well, we do. Well, we have summer camp. We take kids from ages, I think it's 5 to, I think it's 14, 15. And we do trips. They can sign up for anything. We do it by a week, type of a thing. And we also do the fall festival in October. I think it's October 18th. And then we have the haunted house on the 18th and the 19th, which we get a lot of people out for. And we've also implemented the winter stroll at our camp as well, and that comes about in December. So, and our camp is a huge investment. I mean, it's probably, I think it's about 70 years old. It was originally called Camp Clifton, and I believe we purchased it back in 98, 99. And it needs a lot of TLC, that's to say the least. So that's another new focus for us, is the camp.
next one?
I mean, again, as I said, our budgetary constraints, Highlands is a huge factor for us. I mean, that 80%, that 88% of preserved has really had an impact, not just on the township, but on the schools. Our schools have lost, I think it's over the past 7 years, they've lost over almost $20 to $30 million worth of funding on the state side, and we actually are closing our second school now. So it definitely, that's definitely been a driving factor, because we don't have the good thing is we have a lot of people that are staying in Jefferson, but we're not seeing the kid increase anymore because we don't have any more developments coming into town. So I think, our ratables are a huge component. We've gotten a little creative. We have a new property that's being built right now with some apartments, and it'll probably be one of the last big developments we'll see in town. And we worked out a 30-year pilot with them. So that'll be, something that'll definitely have a good effect on our budget as well. All right. Sorry. Let me get back. I think, as we've talked about our 10-year plan, I think one of the biggest things that we've done, and I take pride in this with all my departments, is they need to make sure that when they present their budget on a yearly basis, that they have that 10th year added into that budget, because we need to see what's coming up, make sure that we're continuing to focus on this. And I will say my departments do this. They'll get their research done, they'll get pricing for things. I mean, unfortunately, it's pricing current, but they might add a little percentage in there to continue to grow our 10-year plan. But I think also it's been important because we had 2 new council members join our town this year, our town council, who really had no knowledge of the budget process or anything. And it was great because we were able to provide them the 10-year plans as of 2025 to 2035, so that they can see what's coming forward and what will be some of the bigger expenditures for, future years, which I think, our departments have really bought into this, and I think they truly enjoy being a part of this. I mean, my police is so proactive with everything. I mean, they have a metrics that's unbelievable to see for their capital planning, which has been great.
So Deb, we have another, it's not a question, well, it's sort of, Sean McCarthy, former auditor, now CFO, says, another Jefferson resident here. Kudos to Debra and Bill on putting together this long-term projection. Curious to know how close appropriation revenue projections came to the actual 2025 budget, but also love to hear Bill's counterpoint argument for getting to zero debt. That'd be another discussion, but he can stop in town hall and get those answers.
Yes, please stop by and we'll be more than happy to sit down with them. Okay, next slide.
Yep, technology's up.
Yep, our technology here, as I said, we have a lot of technology here in the township that we utilize. And I think one of the biggest things that I think we didn't at the time, you start planning for potential, I guess, cyber attacks or things of that nature. And in 2020, COVID year, it was a great year for the township. In July of that year, we found that we were under a cyber attack. And if it wasn't for the technology we had in place at the time, I think we would have had a bigger impact. But one of our departments had clued in my IT department to say, hey, I can't get on our finance system, Edmunds. It's telling me I have an error. So he happened to go in and figure out that something was going on and got one of those messages like, hey, we got your info. He went in and unplugged every single item. We stopped the cyber attack within 10 minutes of it starting, and we only lost the day prior's numbers and material. So it was easy to recreate that, but it took us probably a good week to get back up on the system. However, because of that, we've made our technology even stronger from the standpoint of trying to avoid having more attacks come in, and we've gone to more cloud-based systems. We have a lot of more authentication codes that we have to do. I have access to our computers from home. We've had to set up a bigger way to get into the system from home to protect the town. So our technology, our police cars too have all this technology. They all have the computers for, looking up licenses, all of that stuff. Also it's interesting, but the various technology, when it comes to GPS for, some of our vehicles and things of that nature, but our technology is a huge component of the town. And we don't realize how much we utilize it when it comes to body cameras, all of that stuff too. And I think, we've definitely focused on that, and our IT has always continued to show what things are costing. I mean, you have your subscription costs that come into play as well with IT. So they have planned very well, and they continue to add to their 10th year as well. All right.
Last.
So maintaining our service levels. So when Eric and I came in 2019, we had a lot of employees here that have been here for many years. And one of the things that Eric, truly the mayor, prided himself in was customer service. We're here for the residents. We need to provide them the best service we can. And he has instilled that in our employees. And, from the moment he took office, he said, my goal is to provide the best service. I want the feedback when we get it from the public that these residents see how much the employees care to help out these residents and provide the best customer service. So we've invested in our employees through doing, basic employee training. We've done every year. We close down the building in September, and we do a full morning of training, whether it's harassment training, whether it's customer service, whether it's last year, I think we did cyber attack. I mean, we've also done, I hate to say it, active shooter training, God forbid something happens, but we invest in our employees because we want to provide the best to the residents. And so with that, we do a training day. And as I said, we close the building down. And then at noontime every year, we do an employee appreciation barbecue, and we have a huge barbecue with all the employees. And it's a great tool to kind of see everybody have a moment kind of out of work where, you can see the camaraderie there. And we do the same thing with our DPW. I mean, that's mainly for all of our workers in our building. But we also do a DPW, sewer utility and water utility and parks, also, employee appreciation, and we get them the training they need, and then we do the same thing. So it's definitely been something that we take pride in, and I think we get the buy-in from our employees because we want to get that buy-in. And I honestly have to say, very rarely do we get a negative comment. Almost all the time we get, oh, your employees are great. It was such a great thing. And the nice part is, I mean, tax time is never an exciting time for my tax department, but it's amazing at how many residents come in, pay their taxes and say, hey, here's a tray of cookies. Thanks for all you guys do. So, you know, it does go a long way.
All right, it's a wrap-up slide.
All right. So from my perspective, I thought the SWOT analysis that we did as a whole was very beneficial to the town. I think by us getting that buy-in from the departments was huge. I honestly have to say we're in need of doing another SWOT analysis. And I'm hoping we can get that accomplished maybe in the next year. And, you know, I think also through this whole strategic plan over this capital plan that we've continued to grow this plan and continue to make that the focus. And Eric always makes sure that people know that we have this plan in place and we, you know, that's what we focus on. When we get a question from the public, we're like, stop in, we'll talk to you about the plan. We'll show you what we have. So, and, you know, I think from my perspective as an administrator, it's been a huge tool. I think Bill also agrees with that. I think it's been a huge tool for him too, from the finance side. But again, I got to give Bill Egan a ton of credit for everything he does on the budgetary side for us. I mean, he definitely, you know, takes the town and makes sure that we stay financially sound, which is huge for us. So, I mean, to me, this has been a huge success for the township. I think, like I said, doing the SWOT analysis again will be interesting because we've had some department heads change over time. And I think it'll be interesting to see what their perspective is on this versus the prior group that did this. So, you know, and we try to bring in a couple of employees in those departments as well. And I think we're going to rotate that again this time, bringing people in. So I highly recommend the SWOT analysis, and I highly recommend, you know, looking at your capital plan and trying to figure out the impacts for future. And I can't thank Jon enough because we got the Jon Rheinhardt spreadsheets here in Jefferson. And, you know, that's the one thing the mayor wanted was these spreadsheets, and he loves them.
I have to admit, I had a ton of fun putting it together. I went totally geeky on the spreadsheets and went off the charts. But it really truly was cool to see you go from theory and the strategic side of it and connecting it to the actual the practical side, the operational.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were able to get annual feedback on where you were.
Yes.
So, you know, the last bullet point, it was a roadmap to success, and I think that's truly what it is.
It is. It has been. It's been a huge roadmap for us. And I love the fact that we have it in place. So as department heads change over time, they're like, oh, I have a roadmap here. I don't have to just come up with a plan. And, you know, and I think that's, you know, huge. I mean, as, you know, our chiefs of police change, you know, our potential, you know, other department heads will change. They'll have something there that's tangible that they can continue to work on, which I think is huge.
Let me see if there's any questions. We have one, I think. Another Jefferson resident here. Oh, no, that's the old one. We answered that one? Yes, that was done. Okay.
We do have one last poll I'll just launch before we close this out. And if anyone has any more questions, please submit those. So this last one is, does your community have a system to rank and prioritize capital and debt needs? And again, I'll share these results in a few seconds. All right.
But for a change, we're not ahead of schedule.
4 credits is looking good.
I want to thank Deb for doing this. You know, I hit her up about a month ago because most people, Deb, don't take my calls the week or so before the.
I learned that now, so don't worry.
Then I called you a month ahead of this. Right. And what's interesting enough, though, is we took her SWOT analysis, some of the spreadsheets and calculations, and we threw them into Gemini. And I asked Gemini, I said, would you put together the framework for presentation on Jefferson's strategic plan and connecting it with the practical side of it? And it spit out a bunch of stuff. And then I said, oh, I sent it to Deb. She's like, "Oh my gosh, this is great." So we massaged it after there. So we made it apply, and so it wasn't just an AI generator. It just gave us the framework to work within.
No, and I thought it was a very good framework. I mean, when he told me that, what he did with it, and because the night before we had been communicating about just, some ideas. And then the next morning I arrive and work and I have a PowerPoint presentation and I'm just like, how did he worked on this all night? I figured, and then I found out how he did it. So I mean, I know he likes to geek out a lot, but I was truly impressed. So it definitely, we massaged it a little bit and it's been this was a great, thank you for allowing me to participate.
Nice having you.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Thanks,
number
Deb.
2, bud? I
Yeah,
don't see any.
no, I don't see any at all.
We want to do a quick 5-minute break since we're now behind schedule?
Sure.
Give people a chance to get that other cup of coffee? All right, so we'll come
Okay.
back at, what time is it?
11:30?
11:30 sounds good. All right,
All right,
so everybody
great.
5 minutes. We hit that 5-minute mark. Hi, Gab.
All right, John, you guys introducing yourselves or?
I'm going to introduce Gabi. John usually introduces me, but he's not doing so well today. So Gabi gave this really, really short bio, so I felt it necessary to expand upon it. So Gabi, if you don't know her, she is the CFO of Harrison from 2010 till today. Gabi, when you went there or shortly thereafter, was under state, she had a state monitor.
Transitional aid at the time, distressed cities, that's right.
So she had a set of handcuffs on her to come out of that rut. And she did it well, and that town is thriving. So kudos to Gabi, and believe it or not, she became friendly with Tom Neff, which most people can't, but I happen to like Tom too. She was a part-time CFO for New Providence from 2018 to 2021. Prior to that, she was a forensic financial analyst from 2002 to 2010. She has her MBA in accounting from Montclair State University. She's a GFOA board member. She has been a speaker at the League, the GFOA, and actually she and I did something at the State House once. Actually on this topic, I believe it was, but we just did a little bit differently and more. She is also the creator of the GFOA Women's Conference, which was a success from its inception and continues to grow. Actually, Commissioner Suarez has been a recent speaker and is also a fan of the program. So that is Gabi.
That is Gabi.
Mr. Mooney, you want to introduce Mr. Rheinhardt?
You know, I'm looking around for John's bio, and I don't see it, but it would take forever to read it anyway. So, you know, all I can tell you is that John started a very long time ago. What do you say? Probably about, if I've been around almost 30 years, you've got to be doing this about 35 years or so.
Started at Nisivoccia in 1990.
Yeah, well, more than 30. Yeah, 35 years, right? Yeah. So 35, 40, yeah, time goes by fast, but John has done pretty much everything. John is currently the CFO of Bergen County. And you know, if you don't know Jon Rheinhardt at this point, I mean, what can I say? Right? John, you want me to throw anything in there for you? Any plugs? What you're up to lately?
We are good.
GIF member, GIF executives. Oh, he's everywhere. So, and we're always happy to have him helping us out here and putting this on. So thank you, John. And John, Gabi, take it away.
Well, we also have that John graduated somehow from Rider University.
Actually, it was Rider College at the time, so I can't take credit for university.
And later FDU.
Yes, I did.
Even has a master's now.
Yes, I do. So you ready to get going?
I certainly am. We can kick it to the first slide. So I'll start driving a little bit. Today, we are going to chat about mastering labor contract costing in New Jersey local government. This subject is near and dear to my heart. I'll say that I started off 15 years ago, basically receiving a contract after it's been negotiated, and having to figure out how to pay for it, to having a seat in the room, to actively having a seat at the table for negotiations for all of our public safety unions and non-public safety unions. I've probably negotiated at this point about 12 contracts between all the unions that we have in town. The overview, or sort of how we're going to navigate the presentation, is talking about the importance of accurate labor contract costing. So figuring out your base year and understanding sort of all of the components that affect it, identifying and quantifying direct and indirect labor costs, things like longevity, all the way to how increases today are going to impact your pension bills 2 years down the line. Learning methodologies and tools for effective costing. I'll present some simple examples. I'm sure that John's going to appreciate showing you some of his complex and exciting spreadsheets. And then developing skills in presenting and interpreting costing data, which is also very important because you have different audiences and you have to know how to be able to present your information to them effectively in order for the whole process to run smoothly. So if you want to kick it to the next slide, again, this is just an overview on the importance of accurate costing. You should not start your costing the year or the month or the 2 months before you're sitting down to negotiate. This is something that should be a working document consistently for the entire time between when you finish negotiating a contract until the next time that you have to negotiate a contract. You have to work very carefully to make sure that you build into your models every single component that's going to impact your budget. And the importance of it is that we deal with a lot of constraints when we're putting our budgets together. We have caps on appropriations, caps on our levies, and we know that we have a lot of spending within those caps that is not staying within the 2% limitations. And so we also have to deal with the fact that we have certain line items in our budgets that are going up exponentially, the state health benefits plan and the cost of insurance being a prime example from this morning. You need to understand the significant impact of the labor costing on your overall budget. You need to be able to make informed decisions, and you need to meet all of your legal and ethical obligations. So that's the importance of accurate costing.
So in the CFO, it's crucial that whatever leaves your office is accurate and spot on. You know, you make a mistake, they find that mistake, then all your credibility is out the window. So I think from day one, you need to make sure that what you have works. Prove your formulas, don't just assume they work. During the entire process, you're perceived as the subject matter expert. You know, you're the CFO in the room. You're here to present the numbers as you cost them out. So again, it's got to be perfect. You can't have any mistakes. And you know, don't feel ashamed to ask your fellow CFO. You know, Gabi has sent me stuff. I've sent her stuff. Hey, Gab, could you check it out? Am I missing something? That's why we're all here.
And be careful to rely on your same spreadsheets year after year, because a lot of times there are small mistakes or things that need to be corrected. Sometimes you need to just start with a fresh set of eyes and do a complete data dump and reset everything just to make sure that you haven't missed something, which, you know, more oftentimes than not, you do miss something, and it's a good thing to just continue to correct those.
We thought about putting this together because the first time you're faced with costing out a contract, it's overwhelming. Like, where do I start? What do I do? You know, one of the first things you should do is read the entire contract. Make sure you understand every article in that contract, what has a cost, what doesn't. Write your notes on the side. Make sure you completely understand it. Don't be afraid to ask your neighboring CFO, hey, could you help me out? Have you done some models? Can I see stuff? Which is why Gabi and I are going to share several different ones here today with you.
So identifying and quantifying direct costs. Go to the next slide if you could. Analyzing your current salary structure is very important. So basically those are your steps and your ranges. I think we're going to focus a little bit more on public safety because those are the contracts that tend to have a lot of movement between steps in addition to negotiating across the board raises. Dynamic status quo, which most municipalities don't, if you do not negotiate freezing your contracts when they expire, then essentially what you're experiencing is dynamic status quo. Your union has the right to continue to move on steps or to continue to earn longevity, even though the contract has expired, which means that there is an inherent benefit to the contract that the municipality understands the economic impact, but oftentimes the unions are like, well, that's part of our contract already, so that's not really a benefit to us. You need to identify your steps. From there, you need to identify direct benefits and indirect benefits. You need to know about things like longevity or clothing analysis. And these are things that we're going to chat a little bit more about in detail, but you can have college and vet stipends, muster pay, differentials for working evening hours versus early hours, or if you're in a detectives bureau and things like that. And then you need to make sure that you're effectively calculating the cost of those proposed salary changes. And then once you've identified, the most important thing is building your base year matrix. So your base year is the year that your contract expires. That is the beginning of everything. You need to really build into your model exactly what's happening the year that your contract is expiring. Everything from the steps, the date of hire, so that you know when your members of that union are going to move on that step, the longevity, which is contingent on the step amount, your clothing allowance, your stipends, anything that could potentially be impacted during this next round of negotiations has to be built into your base year. I don't know if you want to just go to the next slide.
But I want to reemphasize the fact of what you said. It is the foundation from going forward. This is what they have, and here's what we're negotiating going forward.
Right.
And I think, Gabi, we you said it and I said it, focusing on what each article of their contract means. And there's an example I'll show you in the back that we focused on costing out each article component so we knew what it cost. So we could pull it apart if we needed to.
Right. This is a very simple example, but oftentimes I find that people fail to follow this step, and then they fail to really realize sort of, again, that inherent benefit that the unions are receiving by having dynamic status quo in their contracts. So this is simple. You have 5 steps, which most contracts, at least for the sample of contracts that I've looked at in Hudson County, have more than 5 steps for a police officer. But this is step 1 through step 5. Base year 2025 would be the contract expiring year. 26, 27, and 28, we're assuming that we're negotiating a 3-year contract. So just by simply running an officer from step 1, 2, 3, and 4 during that 3-year period shows that there's a 15, 14, and 13% increase per year just by moving on that step guide without even calculating any sort of across the board percentage increase, which is a 47.69% increase over the 3 years, or nearly $24,000 for one officer. Now, again, something we'll touch on a little bit later on, a big part of your negotiations is understanding the age of your department. Do you have a lot of officers that are on steps, or do you have a majority of your officers that are towards the top of the step guide? Because that can obviously impact your negotiations. So a lot of times you'll sit at the table and you'll say, oh, we're contemplating a 2% raise. 2%, cost of living, the cost of eggs and butter and bread and gas and everything else have gone up by way more than that. Well, I mean, you are looking already at a 47% increase over the next 3 years of your contract. So 2% essentially turns into, it's covered up on me, 56.7%. So nearly a 10% increase over those 3 years on top of the already 47% increase, or $28,000 on one officer. So now, depending on the size of your department and where they fall on the step guide, that's obviously a significant impact. The other piece of it, again, we're going to get into it a little bit more in detail later on, but oftentimes what I like to remind the group that's negotiating is that right now for PFRS, we're contributing 37% in pension. So for every additional dollar of negotiated pensionable wages, we're contributing 37% in 2 years on that increase. I know people don't want to hear it and they think it's basically the town's problem, but for every dollar you're spending 37 additional cents. So for a 47% increase without even negotiating a 2% ATB raise, you're paying 37% on that $24,000 for that officer.
So I'm gonna help out because you keep using acronyms. ATB is across the board. Sorry. CNA is collective.
Negotiations
collective
agreement.
bargaining. Right. You have a couple others later on that I'm going to correct you, just or fill them in because they might be. So take it away, Gab.
Okay, so we're obviously touching on base pay, building out a proper matrix so that then you can basically copy and paste that matrix for every single year that you're negotiating. And again, we're going to show you some examples on how to simplify it so you can just pop in percentages and see what the impact is. But you also have to look at the big picture, right? So things like overtime and premium pay. So if you just simply, and again, you can get as detailed or as simple as you want with certain analyses, but you have to at least incorporate them into your numbers. So for example, if you know that on average, your police department's overtime budget is $400,000, and if you take your average overtime rate and that equates to 7,000 hours, then for every contemplated scenario that you have for salaries, you should be calculating what those new salaries now turn into as far as an average overtime rate times those 7,000 hours to see, okay, so in addition to my S&W line going up, I'm going to have my OT line go up by this number as well, just simply by taking what you're currently experiencing in overtime and now addressing what the new overtime rate is. Another reason that looking at overtime is really important. And again, there are a lot of things that you can negotiate and get creative with in your contracts. But the key to being successful with that is really understanding your departments, the age of your department, and when you have an opportunity to negotiate certain things. So with overtime, for example, the federal standard, or the Fair Labor Standards Act basically says that you have to work 40 hours in a week before you can get time and a half. That's hours worked. So that means if you take a holiday or if you have a holiday, take a PTO day, take a half sick day, those don't count towards your hours worked. It's even more expanded for your public safety. So for police officers, I believe it's 171 hours in a cycle, a 28-day cycle, and it's 212 hours in a 28-day cycle for firefighters. So the town, when we were in a crunch with the fire department, worked out that, hey, look, listen, rather than negotiating or having in the contract that you get overtime for every hour that you're scheduled to work outside of your schedule, which you can negotiate more favorable overtime rates, you just can't negotiate less favorable than the Fair Labor Standards Act. And we negotiated that you would get straight time for overtime, which was beneficial for us because it's cheaper than bringing on a new firefighter, because now you don't have pension and other benefits that come along with it. And we are only paying that extra halftime when they're actually triggering 212 hours worked during a 28-day cycle, which, believe it or not, doesn't happen that often, because more often than not, people are taking days off or there's a holiday or whatever the case is. Again, that worked out because at that time, our department wanted to hook members to make sure that they had enough, people on a tour. And we figured that this was going to be beneficial to the town. And we allowed them basically to expand how many people they had on a tour by just hooking them on the backside at a straight time rate rather than an overtime rate.
So you, Gab.
Oh, me again? Health benefits. I don't think we have to go into this too much. I think we had a pretty scary presentation this morning on the death spiral, which is the exact terminology that they used in the state's report that we're dealing with the state health benefits plan. But health insurance is going through the roof. The only thing that I can say is we have held a very hard line with our Chapter 78 requirements and the cost sharing that our employees are subject to. Every single negotiation, it's one of the first things that gets put forth, that they want to have relief on their contributions to health insurance. And I can say, at least for our town, that the mayor and council have held a very hard line that they are not negotiating away from Chapter 78. One thing that the town has also done successfully, and again, it's often not for your current employees, but be cognizant of the fact that if you negotiate certain things away for new hires, it doesn't affect your current members, and you will see the benefit of those negotiations later on down the line. So in Harrison, we negotiated away healthcare, so we have lifetime benefits, but anyone that was hired after 2017, I believe, is no longer eligible for lifetime health benefits. They're covered until their Medicare age. So now that means that most of my non-public safety employees are leaving, and they're basically no longer covered if they're working until their mid-60s. And my police and fire, if they're retiring in their late 40s to early 50s, we're only covering them for 10 years compared to our current list of retirees that are living well into their 90s. And it becomes quite expensive on the health insurance cost side.
When Gab and I were having this discussion, we talked about it's like the camel's nose coming in the tent, right? What's behind it? There's a lot more. So opening up Chapter 78, and we also, I was thinking of a graphic to put on this one, but I couldn't find a nice one. It's the tip of the iceberg, right? It's the tip coming out. As soon as they move that a little bit, there's a whole lot more behind it that's going to move.
That's right.
Hey, Gabby and John, just before we move on, we did have a poll question related to that last slide. So you guys should see it now. Has your community negotiated employee contribution rates lower than those established under Chapter 78? And I'll share these in a few seconds. All right, make sure everyone responds. Okay, you guys should see the responses up now. So it looks like mostly no, but some yes, I'm not sure. Thank you.
Okay, so we can kick it to the next slide. We're going to talk about identifying and quantifying indirect costs. One of the biggest things is obviously understanding your pension and your retirement costs. we obviously know that we're contributing quite a bit, but John, if you already want to just skip to the next slide, we used Excel to use a forecasting tool, which basically uses a linear regression and it provides statistically significant forecasting. So this is going to give you a pretty accurate forecasting based on past trends as to where we see the rates are going to go. And then it also gives you a lower confidence and upper confidence bound, which is within 5% of the statistically significant forecast. So for PERS, in 2015, we were contributing as employers 12% of your 2013 budget cost for salaries and wages, 2025, 17%. And so over the next 10 years, we can see that number potentially growing to 23% just based off of prior trends. So it's a significant increase, but it's certainly not as significant as the next slide, which uses the same methodology and shows that
Before you go though, this is, if you look at 24 to 25, there was a reduction of 50
Yes.
basis points.
the same
So the
number as 23.
Trend line might not be as bad as it tends to be. And this is determined based upon how adequately funded the program is. And our PERS program is actually not too bad.
And again, I'm going to start off by saying nothing that you put into your projections is 100%, right? Like we don't know necessarily what's going to happen, but we have to use the tools that we have available to us to make educated assumptions and guesses. And so this is where things like using a forecasting formula in Excel, although it may change, again, look, it changed several years ago when we had pension reform. And at that time, I believe the PERS contribution for employees was 5% and it grew to 7.5%, if I'm not mistaken. And the PFRS also I think they were contributing maybe 7% and it grew to 10%. I don't recall the original amounts, but my point is that absent some significant change where the fund either does phenomenal and or there's some sort of pension reform, this is at least taking prior performance and forecasting future outcomes so that you have something to rely on when you're building out your projections, which I know we spoke about this before. In Harrison, we have a lot of pilot agreements. We have projections going out 30 years just to constantly keep an eye on what the impact is going to be on our rateable base and everything else. So numbers like this are important because you can take your projected salaries and wages, and 2 years later, you can continue to project what your pension expense will be in a pretty reliable way.
Absolutely. All right, now we'll go.
Yeah, so PFRS is a little scarier. 2025, 37%, 2015, 24%, 2034 projected to be 50%. So that means for every dollar of pensionable salaries and wages that you are negotiating, 10 years from now, 12 years from now, you'll be paying 50 cents on the dollar for pension, if it follows this trend.
This is the one that has me worried because the PFRS system is still not adequately funded and they're still trying to beef it up so that it is. And the only way to get there is mostly through employer contributions.
And the other thing that's really tricky, believe it or not, is so your later tier police and fire officers are capped on their pensionable wages. And they're capped based off of the wages that are subject to Social Security. And so that number is actually starting to increase quite significantly. So if you have officers for some time that are making over, I think it's like 178 right now, right? Like your higher rank officers. I don't think it's happening yet just because of sort of when that tier started and if that group of people that have been hired have since been promoted to positions where they could be making over that 178. But essentially what's happening is their excess is kicking into DCRP. They're not contributing the 10% into the pension fund, but because the Social Security wage threshold is going up so high, it's probably going to end up exceeding what their salaries get to, which means they had this whole sort of vacation from contributing 10%. But at the end of the day, their salary is still going to be 100% pensionable and, getting 65% of a number that they skipped quite a few years on in contributing their 10%. I don't know.
So,
does that make sense, John?
It does.
Okay.
So if you remember back when the PFRS, the police and fire, took over their own pension system, at the time when the bill was going through, we tried to amend the language to say that the max employer contribution rate would be 31%. And this is back when it was, 27%? Received huge pushback. And everybody says, well, how the heck, how can it ever go over 31%? we're 37%. If you look at the fringe rate for a law enforcement or fire department employee, we're almost at 100% of their base salary. It is like right there between this health benefits alone, you're almost at 70-something%. It's
Absolutely.
incredible.
But nobody wants to hear about that when you're negotiating. That's not the union's problem.
So we had a question pop up.
Go ahead.
Is the state funding their PFRS and PERS correctly?
They mean their own?
The state plan?
I believe so, yes.
Like, are they making their contributions?
Mhm.
I don't know, John, are they? I don't know if you know that.
I don't know that. I know the state was in trouble for years, which is why they were secretly looking to merge all of the PERS together, state and local, because we were adequately funded and they were not. So by doing that, they would have everybody, they created a community. So we would all have to recapitalize together. So we would eat all their losses and we would be underwater again. They were trying to do the same thing with PFRS, which is why the police and fire wanted so desperately to get out of there. But what the state did is ahead of them pulling their pension funds away is they entangled them in long-term investments so they can never divorce completely. It's like having a kid, right? You can't go away because you've got an anchor someplace. So they created a child between the two systems so that they had to cooperate. So the state's, I don't want to call it devious, but it is a little devious that you've entangled it so much that it's hard to pull completely out. But to answer your question, I don't know whether they, or the question was up there, whether they did or not. I know the governor's been putting his amount in, but I don't know if it's enough. Because they're still not as well funded as we are on our side.
Right.
I did read something, I guess, about the state finally making their share 100%. I guess
really?
just in the last 2 years, I think. But you're right. I mean, they were so far underwater for so long, it's going to take a long time for them to catch up.
And if there's no one governor, I mean, it started with Whitman. Who was after Whitman? Corzine? Am I missing somebody in there? Or is it McGreevy? So, but none of them along the way have fixed the problem. They all said that they've made more than the prior person. Well, that's not hard to do. When you're paying nothing, something is more than nothing. And then Murphy, I'm sure it was financed somehow with the pandemic money. He had an infusion of so much money. So why not take advantage of that and fund the program? So you look like the hero, but at the same time, you break the health benefits fund. I don't know. I mean, none of them are perfect and they all make their own mistakes, but here's where we are.
That's right. Okay, so costing out leave and paid time off. Again, sometimes these are things that we don't really think about when we're putting together our base year model or what components impact the contract and then ultimately end up having an impact on our budgets. We oftentimes look at average PTO. This again is another situation where you have to have a really good relationship and understanding of how your public safety unions are operating, right? So let's take police department, for example. You're a 24/7 operation. You get a bucket of PTO. Is your chief of police or is the policy requiring that your officers use their time or schedule their time off, let's say by January 1st of the calendar year? So that's proper planning, right? Because if you have to schedule your time off, then essentially you're not getting to a place where 2 weeks before you want to take time off, you're putting in a request or you're getting towards the end of the year, you have a bunch of PTO that you have to use or lose, everybody's scrambling to use it, then it creates overtime. So if you have proper management of your PTO the way that it stands, and it's not really creating overtime, then maybe that's something that you don't want to touch. But if you see that those policies aren't in place and you're getting a lot of overtime because of poor management, well, one of the things that we did was we actually negotiated a buyback of vacation time. So we said, okay, look, you want to be here with your salaries, then sell back some days. So we actually lowered the amount of time off that the department personnel had, which was a justification for an increase that they received in their current contract. And essentially that created more officers available to be on the street, which is a better service for the municipal, for the taxpayers. And it also reduced the creation of overtime. Be very aware of consistency between your handbooks and your contracts or your policies. When it comes to things like FMLA and FLA, you can require that PTO be used concurrently while you are on federal leave or on FMLA. And that's important because the last thing that you want to do is have somebody out collecting FLI, not using PTO, and then coming back and having a year's worth of vacation that they can also use, because it creates a big deficit in the department, creates an opportunity for big overtime expenses. Another big thing is unlimited sick. That's something that we have in our police department. We have since negotiated away in our fire department, but unlimited sick by law is for the officer's own personal injury or illness. It cannot be used to take care of a spouse or cannot be used to take care of a child. The town has every right to certify every single day that's used under unlimited sick to ascertain that it's falling within the purview of what the statute allows it to be. And the other piece that's important there is that FMLA that's invoked to take care of a family member or bonding or things like that. That's not for your own personal injury or illness. So you cannot use unlimited sick time while you are on FMLA if it is not for something that's specifically impacting your own personal health. Okay, so uniform allowances, tuition reimbursements, professional development funds, tool allowances, safety equipment. These are just a few of the examples of other things that are built into the contract. Back to what John said a while ago, make sure you understand every single financial component in your contract. Read, reread, and then reread it again to make sure that when you're building your base year model that you're taking into consideration all of these expenses. You should also know about which of these benefits are taxable and non-taxable, or what responsibilities you have as an employer to either collect receipts, or if you're paying it, automatically withholding, for example, for clothing allowance. If you're not justifying that those uniforms are in fact only usable for, you know, for their work in the town, that they can't be used otherwise, and if you're not getting receipts for that, then that has to be paid out on a taxable basis. And everything has a cost. Everything is, you know, basically part of their whole fringe package or economic package that they're receiving. And so it should be included in the quantification of what it is that they're receiving and what you're negotiating.
One of the funniest requests I ever got was that they came in one year and said, "We want our birthday off." I said, "You got to be kidding." I had to hold back the laugh. I said, "Who the heck gives a birthday off?" Because it has a cost. Oddly enough, I get to Bergen County and I find out I get my birthday off. So I laughed about it. But when you're negotiating, adding that as an additional benefit in the contract, every day has a value. Everything that they do has value. You know, that they want an extra bereavement day. If somebody's not there doing a job, whether it's law enforcement, public works, or anything else, somebody else is covering that job. So you're reallocating resources to cover that extra benefit. So everything has a cost or an impact. We
actually had an example that worked in the opposite. So because there's so much mandatory training under the Attorney General guidelines for the police department, we had where we gave a certain number of days off in order to get a certain number of days of quote unquote training, where the chief could call in the whole department to do a specific type of training, whether it was, I mean, obviously not their firearms, they can't do that at the same time, but if there was like physical training that needed to, physical fitness training that needed to be done and things like that. So we actually changed that. We eliminated the time off because we saw that there wasn't necessarily proper management of making sure that we were taking advantage of all the hours we were entitled to. And we said, okay, up to 48 hours per year of AG mandatory training is going to be paid at straight time. So we're getting rid of the day off and we're just giving you straight time instead. And now we have these, you know, whether it's your firearm certification, and then there's like a physical fitness that you have to do, and 3 or 4 other that are mandated that we know everybody has to do every year, we get those 48 hours at straight time. And so that's been beneficial. And it's one of those things where you're analyzing, for example, a request for a day off in compensation of something. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to show you just a very, very, very simple spreadsheet. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully successfully.
Oh, I need to unshare. Give me a second.
Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, this is a very, very, no, not that. This is a very simple, step guide, base year, the contract as it stands, and then I'm contemplating a 3-year contract that we're negotiating. This base year here, which would be 2025, hold on a second, get rid of my. Okay, so 2025 is your base year. You're going to have every single officer listed, what their union is, their date of hire, the current year that you're negotiating. So it calculates years of service, automatic calculates your steps as of December 31st of that year, what step you're in that year, and then essentially longevity, which is a calculation simply based off of years of service, calculates longevity, a subtotal, clothing. This is very, very simple. Obviously, you can have 15 more stipends and a bunch of other information built into here. But
So,
go ahead.
So you run everything horizontal across for every employee for the length of the contract?
I do.
Okay.
So you do it differently, I see.
No, it's okay. I haven't seen, you showed me the other day, but we were going fast, so I didn't look at the detail, but.
Yeah, I'll show you the summary side of it then. So I go across to build everything in, and then you basically clone your base year and drag it across for every year that you're negotiating so that you have step movement, longevity changes, and everything else. You want to have things hyperlinked, so I'll show you the next page. That's the summary page, but that's going to then basically drive your percentage increases, your clothing allowance, so on and so forth. You should always group things so that you can consolidate it. It's a little bit easier to take a look at things. One thing I always like to do is, obviously just take an average salary then for that negotiated year or for that calculated year, get an average straight time rate and an average overtime rate, because then it's very easy to do an OT analysis as far as what those increases are going to do to your overtime budget. All of that stuff then basically is just going to drive, again, this is a super simple example, but it's going to drive a summary page. These are sort of the type of workbooks that I use when I'm sitting in with my negotiating team, so we can just pop in numbers and see what it looks like. So simply taking my base year with a 0% increase and no change in clothing allowance, because it's the one sort of other input that I'm playing with right now. So this takes into consideration base salaries and wages, longevity, pensionable salary, clothing allowance, total clothing, and then when that pension impact is going to hit, and then, a total. So I take that base year, I drop those numbers into this box right here as basically a hard-coded box so that we can see what the changes are. So off the bat, without making a single change and maintaining dynamic status quo, this contract is going up 41%. Significant amount. Okay. It's also going up in overtime. The overtime budget would be going up approximately 36%. So $1.6 million, significant over 3 years. So now you can simply, they're talking about perhaps wanting, a 2. I did 2 across the board, and then I did 375 on the clothing allowance. So, very quickly you can see already what that impact is. So your total increase is about 10%. Your overtime budget is obviously going up significantly. But by having things built into your back sheets, but then keeping your front sheet super, super simple, it's easy to throw in different scenarios, what your budget is, and sort of just seeing where basic terms that you're negotiating land economically. And then that's where you can sort of start getting creative and talking about some things that are outside the box. I don't know if you have anything to say about this, or we can pop back to the PowerPoint.
No, if you'll give it back to me, that'd be great.
Do I have to stop sharing? Yes.
Yeah, you do.
I do have a poll. Last one on this section, I'll just launch while we're in between here. Labor contracts. Okay, this one is, what tool do you use to perform your labor contract calculations?
And we still list loaded. I was going to put in Quattro Pro, but I didn't think it was appropriate because I think that's dead.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the results. Okay, it looks like mostly Excel, so thank you.
That's you, John, using Google Sheets.
I use them both, but I like Google Sheets. So,
Yeah.
Excel, Google Sheets, or whatever you use, they are your friend, whatever you're more comfortable with. I haven't been spending a lot more time with Google Sheets because I like the fact that you can share a sheet with read only, so they can't touch any of your data. But if you've got a committee that's watching the negotiations, they want to watch you price it out, you can do that, and they can look at it as an evolving dashboard, evolving model. So that's important. The Google Sheets, if you feel comfortable, you can give a little bit more access so they can play with some, or you can put up a sample copy so they can do it. But it's all cloud-based, so you don't have to worry about sending files back and forth. So that's what I like about it. The formula is listed up above, whether it's VLOOKUP, ceiling, index, sum if, and then Gabi just threw at you guys all grouping. If you've never used grouping, it is a wonderful tool because it hides all the detail and just shows you the summary. That's another great tool. I know Excel has the scenarios, so you can save your scenarios and not have to save a different file for each one. But there's tons of tools. It's just taking advantage and learning what it is. And using the dashboard approach that Gabi did is something I also do. It gives you that what if ability to create your baseline and compare what's going on. And Gab, this is just what we were just looking at, right?
Yep, that's just a summary, so you can hop to the next slide.
Okay. But I think it's important to create that baseline at 0 so you know what you're comparing against.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so gathering and managing essential data. This is very, very broad, right? So you want to pull information, and I know John's going to talk about this, I think, a little bit later on when he shows sort of, I think you use your example for the Board of Ed that you did, and I know you got like a data dump from their payroll records, so you want to, not only look at the hard numbers that are in your contract, but you want to look at things like, for example, your ordinances and your table of organization. So you may have a table of organization that calls for 61 in your police department, but you're currently staffed at 51. So then you want to have a conversation with either your police committee and or the chief of police or whoever the decision maker is and say, okay, are we at 61 and we are looking to hire 10, or are we authorized at 61 and we're good at 51? Because if you're at 61 and authorized to hire 10 and it's going to happen during this calendar year, then you better build in those 10 potential employees that are coming in half year. Now, I personally like to build it in for a full year so that I have a buffer. And then you at least know where you have some room to play if you need to cut down some numbers just to get your budget to work. You want to look at your the age of your department. We had a really unique opportunity where we had quite a few officers that were on steps, but we also had a big class that was just about to come in. And so we reworked our probationary step in our police department. So typically for police officers, you have a 6-month stint in the academy. A lot of the stuff applies to the fire department too. We just negotiated police, so that's why I keep referring to them. But you have a 6-month stint in your academy, and then you have a 12-month working test period before you're considered a quote unquote permanent employee. What we saw with, a couple of instances where during their probationary period, where they had the same benefits as a permanent employee, they had unlimited sick time, they were moving on the step guide, they were receiving certain benefits and perks before they were even considered a permanent employee of the town. So we negotiated a little bit of a sweeter deal on the people that were on current step guides. We actually consolidated the step guide from 12 to 10, but created a probationary step that kept you frozen until you became a permanent employee. So essentially 18 months without having a raise. We eliminated unlimited sick for probationary employees. So now they were down to 15 sick days. And if they had to take time off beyond that, they were basically coming out of their own pocket or having docked pay. And so even though we eliminated 2 steps on the back end, we essentially created a 1.5 steps on the front end. So it was really a 1/2 step delta. But what we've done is, if for some reason someone's working test period extends beyond that 18-month period, let's say they're out for a month because they're ill and you can tag it onto the back end, their salary is frozen and they're not getting the benefit of moving on that salary step guide. And so sort of those are the things that, those opportunities only come along if are you at your TO and is your entire department already on a step, or do you know that there's a big incoming class and you could take advantage of negotiating things for people that are not yet permanent employees? And that's the information that you're going to get from things that are outside of your current contract.
So back to the data, the more data you have, the better off you are. I mean, there's no such thing as too much data. It just means you've got to weed through it to make sense of what you have. Having the ability to get a data dump for the payroll system, as Gabi said, is ideal, because then you can get just raw data and then you can do what you want with it. we talked about insurance earlier. Talk to your brokers, see where the trends are. I mean, if you've got a geo as your broker and say, where are we going? I mean, he could talk to you about the death spiral of the state health benefits program. And okay, I got a cost that's coming up that might be really not good for us. But I think having those discussions early on with all of your sources of data is important. Gabi, when you were talking about putting this together, she was talking about, gathering contracts from neighboring towns. How easy was that, Gab?
Not easy, unfortunately. And then it turned into mayhem when I sent out Oprahs, and it was really like, I just want information. I have my union coming in saying, hey, I want to make what this town, this town makes this. Or no, let's put it this way. The local area cop makes this, gets this, gets this, gets this. Well, essentially what they're giving you is cherry picked, like the best of each contract cherry picked and saying like, this is what's happening for us. So I went and I pulled, and I think this is an exercise that everybody should really do. I pulled every single contract and I created a spreadsheet that had everything from how many steps does the municipality have? Are they civil service? Do they have a residency requirement? Do they require their employees to contribute Chapter 78, or have they deviated from that? Do they or don't they have longevity? How many steps in their superior ranks? Some towns had 5 steps in their superior ranks. So when they were saying, oh my goodness, like I want to have what this town is making at a captain's salary, I said, but it takes them 5 years to get there. You have 2 steps, and the time value of money is that you're earning this number, although it's less than the number 3 years from now, it's more than their number at step 2, and now you're earning it for 3 years. Invest your money. And so I know sometimes it's hard to get that concept across, but it exists and it's true. So it's very important to sort of create that comparison. And the other thing, it actually worked in the union's benefit, because I was able to come up with a true average of what the step structure was in our county. And I saw that our cops were slightly underpaid. And so we negotiated a number that was beneficial to them and made us more competitive as a hiring authority within the county.
I had one year where the police were comparing themselves to 2 separate towns and saying, well, they're higher than we are. We went to go look at it. And I said, well, they gave up longevity. You didn't. And the other one, they got a bump because they sold out the unborn. So they gave away lifetime health benefits. So there are a whole bunch of things that played in there that they didn't want you to look at. But you're right, the same thing. You start to look at apples to apples, and there's a separation as to why things happen in those other towns, because those towns made it was negotiating, right? They gave up something to get something.
And another really big thing to look at is your average hourly rate. Not every department operates on a pitman schedule. You have some cops that are working an 8-hour day, some cops working a 10-hour day, some cops working a 12-hour day. So if you want to compare, for example, before we went to a pitman schedule, they were working a 10-hour day, and I forget what that comes out to. I know a pitman comes out to like $21.90, and then you back out the Kelly days, so it's like $20.80, right? But on a 10-hour day, they were working less than that. So they were comparing their salaries to someone who's working a pitman. I said, okay, but your average hourly rate is higher than theirs because you're working less hours. It's like saying, do you want me to compare you to a teacher? They work 10 months out of the year, you work 12 months out of the year. You have to compare apples to apples. So one of the other things I did look at was taking the salary, taking the schedule for that department, and calculating an average hourly rate to make sure that we were within the proper range as well.
So Gab, for the benefit of the people that might not know, can you explain the difference between pitman, Kelly time?
So I'm going to explain it. I knew this stuff like the back of my hand because we transitioned to a pitman in 2017, I want to say. But a 12-hour shift basically allows you to have 2 shifts in a 24-hour period, which is where you're going to get the most benefit out of your police department, right? Because if you have a 10-hour shift, you have overlapping time. And if you have an 8-hour shift, then essentially you have 3 cops on to cover a 24-hour period. That 12 hours on a quote unquote pitman schedule actually generates more hours scheduled than you are allowed to work by FLSA standards. And so when you negotiate a pitman schedule, you can either automatically pay it's between 80 and 90 hours of overtime, or you can give them what's called Kelly days, which I think that was probably the name of the cop or something when they negotiated this. You give them, in our town, it's Kelly days, it's about 84 hours that then they can take time off so that they are not scheduled where they're actually working over the FLSA threshold for where they would get automatic overtime. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you for explaining that. All right, next one is presenting and interpreting costing data. This is where we get to have some fun.
So before we start showing, I know that we have, oh, that's coming on down the line. So I will say this, just quickly before you start, John. You are in this like all the time, so you know it like the back of your hand. Like John corrected me before, I'm using acronyms and it's not always stuff that people understand. You have to really segregate your audience. So you have your negotiating team that you're sitting behind closed doors with, and it's typically a smaller group. And that's where you're going to really show all the detail and talk through every little nuance and make sure that you're not missing something. Then you have when you're sitting down with the group of people you're negotiating, and now obviously you're picking and choosing what it is that you're expressing and showing and where you have leverage. And then you have, two more audiences, which is your governing body and then essentially the public, right? You need to keep it simple. You need to make it where you are communicating the information that's most important to them, right? Like, what is it that you're negotiating that's impacting or implementing the policy that your governing body has put in place? And what is it that you're doing? So for example, when we negotiated a pitman schedule, we got an increase, our officers got an increase of 12%. It was a big number, but we actually got 15% more in productivity and time. So that's where we were able to show the public, but this is the increase in public safety or quote unquote boots on the ground that you're getting. And another thing that's really important, especially when you're negotiating or presenting to your governing body, I find is that when you have a home run change in your contracts, like longevity, we negotiated away longevity in 2017. To this day, every time that I calculate my contracts, I still run a clone of those contracts with longevity. Right now, my entire police department, my superior officers, half of them have longevity, half don't, but all of my patrolmen do not have longevity. I run their contract still with the longevity that we negotiated away several years ago, because I love to show the governing body, this is the benefit that we negotiated several years ago, and this is the economic impact it has on our budget today and the savings that it's turned into. So it's not just presenting even what you do now, but it's sort of not forgetting the benefit of things you've negotiated in the past, because they really enjoy seeing the benefits of sort of those difficult decisions that were made in the past.
Gotcha. So now we'll start the slide.
Well, I mean, it's basically what I went through. The elected officials focusing on the bottom line, your negotiating team with details, and then to the public, making sure that you're touching on the issues that are important to them. And with public safety, it's always just availability and fast response time. And, a long time ago, I learned that you need to present things as if you were talking to a second grader. And it's actually great advice, because when people are looking from the outside in, they don't understand all the nuances that you're dealing with on a daily, and you want to keep it very, very simple.
Is that like FLSA and?
Yes.
I'm picking on Gabi a little bit.
That's nothing.
So,
I'm not used to it.
all right, you get me back all the time, but clear and concise language is important. And she's right. Understanding your audience is one of the biggest things, making sure that they understand what you're saying. Some people don't like numbers, some people like pictures. So giving them graphs and charts and showing where it's going is helpful as well.
This next slide we talked about a little bit before, using data to inform negotiations. The biggest takeaway from this is pulling in information from your neighboring municipalities. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be from just towns in your county. I know that when we looked at neighboring towns, I pulled every single contract from Hudson County, but then I also pulled from Newark because we're over the bridge from them. So you also want to look at geographically bordering towns, even if they're not in your county.
I would do a radius search on mine, figure out who's within a certain radius. So if it crossed boundaries, then you still collected them. Another
big thing, you're right, is let's see, what's the word I'm looking for? You also need to get a good understanding of the opportunities that your department has that maybe other departments don't, or vice versa. So in Harrison, we're a square mile, we're 20,000 people. We have Red Bull Arena on the south side of town. We were the fastest growing city, or top three or the fastest, I forget now, from the 2010 census to the 2020 census, we went from 13,000 to 20,000 residents. Our redevelopment area exploded. The construction that goes on in Harrison, in addition to the Red Bull events, all create an opportunity for extra duty work for our officers. So their opportunity to make a significant amount of money through extra duty is far more than other municipalities. And so sometimes I'll get someone coming in, a union coming in saying like, they're making this in this town. And I went and I did my homework and I tried to figure out what's the average amount of money that an officer is making in that town on extra duty. And it doesn't compare in the least to what our officers are making. And so you have to look at that. Sometimes the salaries are higher, but the opportunity to make excess money is less. And so those are things that you need to look at as well.
Agreed. So Gabby said before that you should be prepping well ahead of the negotiations themselves. So if you're looking for the neighboring contracts, you shouldn't be looking when you're in the middle of contracts or negotiations, because now you're scrambling. You're just going to put yourself behind with the cost out, everything else that's going on. Most of that data is supposed to be up on the PERC website, but they're behind. It's not all current, so you're going to have to do a little bit of digging to get it.
And expects phone calls. Why are you looking for this? What's going on? I just want to look at the contracts. And I told everyone, I said, I'm more than happy to share, like within our county with the CFOs that, I chat with. I said, I'm happy to share what we came up with then. It'll help you too.
So here's an example of me geeking out a little bit. It's the data to the right of the cells it's supposed to be one big long vertical spreadsheet, but the only way for me to show it here was to split it up and move it over. What we did is we broke out 4 years of data, and we put in the yellow box was the goal. We had the base year, and then where our goals were. And what we were able to do is every one of the gray boxes is a variable that you could change that affected 3,784 employees with a single click. It was an amazing contract to be involved in. I got hired as an outside consultant, and I had a ball doing this one. But not only did they have 3,784 employees in this one union, it was broken down into 25 subgroups of employees. And you can see that there were different categories of each one of the different union classifications. And each one had their own wants and needs. So it was kind of cool. We talked about gathering data early on. This one was absolutely a monumental task. We ended up getting a payroll file from the payroll department. It was raw data. Took that, created a pivot table that broke them down into that union, broke them down into the subgroups based upon where they were, and then also each step. And there were up to 18 steps in each one of these contracts. So talk about data dump and merging it all, making it into something meaningful it was a lot of work. We also found out that when we pulled all these employees in, that we were missing approximately 100 vacancies in the analysis. And that absolutely should be included in the calculation and in the base. And it accounted for $4.3 million. And they're like, yeah, it's 100 people. I'm like, well, it's still 100 people. We also, as a part of the process, identified another 200 employees that were misclassified in the system. And it provided an opportunity for the personnel and payroll department to fix where they were in the chart, so that when we start looking at data, we didn't have any flaws in the data. Gets back to validating what you've got, making sure that whatever comes out of your office is spot on and perfect. You can't have those flaws, because it's one little, you open that crack to something you've done wrong, and they're going to exploit that. So this became our tool. By changing all the variables in the gray area, we were able to then look at what happened up top in the recap and the dashboard. So the next one, and this is one of the 25 units here. Actually, it's two. It covered two of the unions. It was broken down into different steps. Step 1 had fixed dollar amount changes. Step 2 through 11 were percentages with one fixed dollar amount. Became very complex in how to split and carve this union apart depending upon where people were in the process, right? So in 2016, they wanted to do fixed dollar increments. Then they went to 17, some were fixed, some were percentages. So you can see how complicated it becomes. What I traditionally do when I'm doing a contract is I show the vertical movement, right? Coming down your steps, and then the horizontal movement, moving over for your annual increase. And I would normally do a third one, but there wasn't enough room here on the analysis to show not only the vertical and horizontal, but combined and what that pressure is. So you can start to see where it is. We used in this instance conditional formatting to highlight areas that were low, high, and green was low, red was high, so we could see where some of the pressures were in the contract that was being proposed. Just another tool. We're talking about tools and how to do it. This one was a little obscene just because of the volume of people in here, but it was a good exercise to go through. That data then turns into this. We use the scattergram. When you've got a small number of people in a department, you can cost them out individually. But when we're talking, in this case, it was 1,999 employees out of the total 3,784. What we did is we found out where they were in the steps. It also ignores breakage. It just looks at where they are and who's going to go and that they don't leave at this point, which obviously breakage is going to happen with this many people. But you can see in year one, we had 368 people. And then in year two, there's nobody in one. Those 368 moved to step two. But it makes it a lot easier to cost this out. But because there is going to be breakage in this contract, we weren't worried about missing the individual nuances of the employees. We could price them as a group. But it's absolutely, it's not as precise as you could be if you do them individually. So the next one here is a recap of every single union group, which is on the far left, the employee count in the groups, the salaries, the stipends, the total. So we were able to price out every one of these individually, accounting for all 3,784 employees, the vacancies you can see on the bottom, and we grew that vacancy number year over year based upon the demands of the union. So when you're looking at it, it's a lot to look at, but it does encapsulate and captures all of what happened with this school district. Again, we need to look at tools, right? I use pivot tables here. We use vertical lookups, sum ifs, count ifs, if statements on, if they where they were in the thing, in the guide, not the thing. Use the ceiling function, which allows you to bump it up, index match, and there's a whole lot more that was applied in doing these. But again, it's a tool that you need to learn, whether it's Excel, Google Sheets, or something else. But again, the validity of your data, you need to come up with ways to cross-check and make sure you're not missing data when you do this. I think that's not the most important thing you pull away from this session. That's it. What comes from your office should be spot on and perfect. So, I worked with Bud for 5 years, I think it was Bud. And every year Bud would say he would find something wrong with no matter what report you gave him, he would find something wrong. And he would, whether it was a dollar sign missing on the top of a column, anything. So you challenge him every year. So it became kind of fun, but he made me what I am today.
I take no credit.
So if we move on to the next one, which is here, this is a crazy dashboard of here's all the demands based upon article on the top left. So the top part was the demand. The bottom part was the same articles, but based on what the dollar impact was on the union contract. So everything in yellow was a variable. So if you change any of those, it manipulated everything else below it. And we could see the impact year over year on what was going on with this contract. It also did a variance to a 2% increase. It allowed us to isolate by each article in the contract what that was. And we would go back and zero everything out. So from the top part, Article 4 was salaries. We had 2s across the board. Detective stipends, we had 2,500 across the board. Officer in charge. So there was a bunch of different things here, whether it was a rate differential, whether it was a fixed dollar amount or a percentage. But again, we can quantify down below what happened. So this became a very busy but useful tool. And if you look at the very bottom, it says variance to 2%. First year, we were over by $419,000. Second year, $509,000. Third, almost $601,000. So you can see that we were able to quantify where we were off that base year.
That's great. You had that on your first sheet too. You had variance to budget. And I think that's another really important thing is establishing your budget and making sure that then you're constantly comparing where your numbers come in to where it is that you want to end up. So you see how much of a variance there is.
And they don't like it because you're dissecting every part of this contract into what and who they are. I remember the first year I did a contract negotiation. They said they felt like they were going to the butcher shop and being dissected. I said, it's what you cost. It's not personal. This is truly what you cost. If I ignore it, then I'm not doing my job.
That's right.
And again, so this is not personal. This is actually factually what they cost. Sometimes they don't like the truth. So here's another model we did where we tied in all of the union pricing into the budget and showed we broke this one down into between the rank and file PBA, the superior officers, the chief, because the chief's contract was linked to the SOA. So we costed each one out individually and then put it back into the budget and broke it down using 2018 as the base year and 19 we would grow it forward so we could see what those were. Became a very useful tool. We also tied, similar to what we did with Jefferson's budget, projected it, used the same philosophy here, but we inserted the union contracts back into the budget with all the other assumptions that we had done based on revenues, appropriations, to see what it did to shock it. And this 6.28%, you know, is what just the PVA itself, 9.04, 7.11, 6.68, it's a lot of money. And this was a small town. But we could show the impact on the cap calculation, and they were well over their caps. So just different ways to present your data, to pull it apart, to put it back in, to show what this does to the town. It was just another example of how to break it out. If you've got a really small group of employees, you could do them individually. So to go through this, there's a center dotted line. So the information to the left is the final calculations that come from the right. So it shows the guide movement first to the right, then it showed the step movement, and we split it on the date of hire or the date of a promotion. So down to the day, we could use this to do our payroll for the year because we knew exactly what they should be making. And then that data then was merged back over to the left, and we can see the true cost of this employee. So at the end of this contract, they're looking for 5 years. It was 31.53% total, annual average of 6.31 on his employee, for a total increase of 7,489. Just another tool. The step movement, step and guide, this person happened to be a top step, so this is, I probably should have picked a different one, but you can show them similar to Gabi's where we increment them steps every year. And then you show that split on both the vertical and horizontal movement. Just another tool. But you get the true cost by employee. Another one that they don't like.
Yes.
Best practices. So Gabi, my notes say here that you and I are supposed to shoot from the hip and just wing it.
I think that I think everything that we chatted about throughout the whole presentation was best practices. Can't stress enough the importance of having an accurate working document for all of the costs and that are going to economically impact your budget. Highlight successful strategies and potential pitfalls encountered. I used the example of longevity before. Just because something is, you know, you may not hit a home run during this contract negotiation, but hold on to things that you've negotiated in the past and continue running those things forward so that you can just show the impact and the savings that you've generated from prior contract negotiations. Focus on practical application of costing principles. You know, again, another really important thing is to not only read and reread your contracts, but then to work really closely with your payroll department and HR to make sure that things are being implemented properly. Another thing that I do is when something comes up that's in a gray area in the contract, I like to deal with it, put a policy in place that then gets agreed to by both unions. And then I always have a working folder for the next CNA. So if we've negotiated through 2028, as soon as that's done, I start my next folder. So it'll be like 29 to 32 or 33, whatever. In that folder, anything that gets clarified, I dump it into that folder so that come the next contract, we don't miss anything that then we have to build into the next contract document. You know, we are guilty of having some contracts finalized and signed, and then we have an MOA, and then the actual next contract doesn't get drafted right away. It's a pet peeve of mine, but I have no control over it. So the goal is to have a contract that has everything in it, and then, you know, you can start putting together the pieces that you deal with in between, so that your next contract incorporates everything. So you have one place to go to for guidance.
So when I'm going through the cost data analysis, I'm preparing as if I'm going to be presenting to an arbitrator. Because if it goes to interest arbitration, and for those that you have not been exposed to that, it's binding arbitration. where both sides have to present their cases. If you get to that point, it means that everybody failed because you couldn't go through negotiations and succeed. And sometimes that's where you need to be. But it's not a pleasant place to be. And as the CFO, you have to defend every one of your numbers. You have to explain that not the arbitrator, but the PBA's attorney is going to be looking for something you did wrong. They're going to be scouring through. They're going to hire another financial expert to go over all of your numbers. So it gets back to that whatever leaves your office has to be perfect. Know your numbers, know them solid, and know how it works, because they are going to challenge you on them.
And for those that don't know, I mean, you have basically you have to have 3 meetings, and if you're not successful from there, it can kick to interest arbitration. So I don't personally think it's a place you want to be right now. When there was a 2% cap, I wouldn't have minded, but now with the latest language we saw, they're taking out things like consideration for any caps, meaning like your 2% caps are no longer up for conversation during interest arbitration. A CFO they're contemplating is going to be the one who's responsible for providing all of the numbers that are going to be relied on by the arbiter and by the unions that you're negotiating with. So once again, a lot is falling on the CFO's back.
So to wrap it up, I think this just reemphasizes everything we've said, right?
That's it.
Fosters strong collaboration between HR, finance, legal, and the unions themselves. Right? Establish a process of ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the labor costs, which gets back to Gabi's point. You don't just do it and put it down. You keep looking at it. You figure out where you are. The proactive planning for future contract negotiations. Don't wait till you start negotiations to prepare your data and then to gather your information. Do it as you're going. The other one too, and we have not actually done this so far, but we document all assumptions and calculations early. Right? I keep a list on the side. Here's what I assume. Here's what we did. Here's what doesn't fit, so that you know that there's something that you have to resolve. And by resolving up front and saying that there's a gray area, it doesn't become something they can pick at you later on. It becomes something that you rip the Band-Aid off and said, this doesn't work. How do we resolve this?
Right.
And then revisiting your models, making sure that they're fresh. And I like Gabi's point of don't just pick up the last model and update it, because you might have a oops in there, or you might have a manual override because there was something that was going on.
And again, not to interrupt, but when you go from contract to contract, we often sometimes get, this goes back to my original comment, you can either be the one getting the contract after it's negotiated, or you can be sitting in the room, or you can actually be part of the negotiating team. But at the end of the day, just looking at what's on paper, you're really going to miss a lot of important information. You really should invest in trying to understand what's going on within the departments that you're negotiating with, so that you can really quantify qualitative issues as well, because it's important. Whether it's maybe you're paying too low, in your public works department, and you need to address that so that you can entice better talent and have better retainage in the department, or just anything, whether it's, sick time use and abuse. Those are things that you should be aware of, because they do impact how you're going to successfully negotiate.
Agreed. So Katie, do we have one more question, or can we make one up?
We did have one more poll that I can launch now. It was about I'll do that one. Are you the person responsible for costing union contract proposals?
I'd also like to know who is in the room and who's not with negotiations. Are you included in the process?
There's no question, John. So either we did really well or we put everyone to sleep. I don't know.
All right, I'm going to share the results. Okay, it looks like more no's than yeses here.
That's incredible. I know some leave it up to the labor attorneys. I don't agree with that, because they're not finance people. Can we ask the next question of just, who is included in the room for negotiations?
Yes, let me put that in.
While we're waiting for that to come up, I just want to take a quick minute to congratulate Gabi for a successful Women at Work conference recently.
It was
I know you were
wonderful.
heavily involved with that, and along with another participant today, Mary Jones Shamming is one of our participants in the roundtable.
Yeah, she's been on the committee since the very beginning. And it was wonderful. We had over 100 people attend. It was really great.
Funny story though is
Congratulations.
somebody sent me a picture of John Donadio listening to the discussion about menopause, and his head's down, or he's looking like this look of like, what do I do?
I think he was having a hot flash.
Somebody did something here. Q&A.
Okay, I'm gonna launch that poll now, John. So do you typically participate in your labor contract negotiations?
Somebody had a question too. How do you
Yeah,
handle?
I don't think I've ever seen that. I don't think they can dismiss you.
I was gonna say then, who's negotiating? Is it just the BA?
Do you get to kick out their attorney and their people too?
When the union, well, first of all, if they have an attorney, they can't kick out your attorney.
Right.
How do you handle when the union has a CFO and labor attorney dismissed?
Can't do that.
I mean, my understanding is that your attorney can't talk to the union without an attorney present, and their attorney can't talk to us without an attorney present. It's either
Right.
both attorneys or no attorneys.
Only 1/3 that are in the room. That's crazy.
Wow.
I don't know how to answer that one because I've never seen that happen.
The BA for management with about 6 to 7 union reps. The BA for management with about 6 to 7 union reps.
I don't know. That's a statement, not a question.
I still don't think that the union gets to dismiss you, though. If they can have 7 union reps, why is the BA not allowed to have their reps as well? I mean, I can understand if they don't have an attorney, I don't think you can have an attorney. I don't know if it's can, shall, what the right word is, but they
Yeah.
certainly can't tell you what other professionals from the town can be in the room.
Correct.
Seems like intimidation.
They'd never do that.
What, sit in a room with their guns and talk to you about how much money they want?
I was asked if I could bring mine.
Just pay attention to see if the light's on their cameras.
Thanks, John and Gabby. Great presentation. We also had another presentation, financial planning for municipal employees, but because we've gone over, we have Damien Paumi from Nisivoccia Wealth Management, and Damien was just going to give us a couple of minutes and maybe do a full presentation at the next roundtable.
Hey, Damien.
Damien's our Director
Yeah.
of Wealth Management.
I was thinking you either have a seat at the table or you might be on the menu. You know, rumor has it. But very quickly, one of the things that I just wanted to share with people, as the questions that are typically coming in right now are twofold when it comes to financial services. So I figured I'd share two different things, and then I sent this over to Katie, so if anyone has any questions. But there was one monster change with regards to Secure 2.0 in regards to retirement plan contribution limits. So as many of you know, with the 457 plans that are available inside of municipalities, the typical contribution max limit was 23,000. That went up to 23,500 this year. And then there's a catch-up contribution for those that are over the age of 50, and that has been $7,500 consistently. The major difference, though, is if you actually look in here, there is a change that happened for people that are between the ages of 60 and 63. I don't know if you can all see sort of my screen over here, but there's an enhancement that exists for people that are the age of 60, 61, 62, and 63, where instead of a max contribution of that catch-up being $7,500, the contribution can actually go to $11,250. So that's important because somebody who, let's say, is in their 50s, so prior to 50, max contribution 23,500. You turn 50 in the year, you're entitled to the catch-up contribution, so you can go up to 31,000. But those people that are between the ages of 60 and 63 you could actually go as high as 34,750, and then at 64, you actually go back to the original catch-up contribution. So I just figured I'd throw that out there, so that this way everyone was aware of that. Make sure that that's included in your payroll file in case anyone is utilizing it. And then the second hot topic that everyone's asking me about, and I found a little brochure about it, is I call it the big beautiful bill. And everyone talking about the big beautiful bill. And Gabi, when you and John were talking about overtime, instantaneously I thought about how tips and overtime in the big beautiful bill are exempt from taxes. So I figured I'd share a little bit of color on that one, at least the bill that passed the House last week. So if you actually look at the provisions that went through, and I'll look at here, the section on no taxes on overtime pay. It's important to understand, that the compensation structure of the person who'd be getting that overtime pay, because you would not be eligible for any of the, tax favorable treatment on overtime pay if you're highly compensated. So if you have somebody that, in 2025, the earnings are greater than 160,000, any of that overtime pay for a highly compensated person, and that, like I said, is indexed this year at 2025 for 160,000, that doesn't count. So the idea that, and I'm oversimplifying this, but if you think about, somebody who maybe is an hourly working in been with a town a really, really long time, and this is why salaries are important for the people that have been around really a long time. But if they're on hourly and they crossed 160, then in theory that overtime pay would not be actually tax exempt. So there was a bunch of cool things inside of here about the SALT provisions going from $10,000 up to $40,000, and the horse trade that goes along with that. No taxes on tips. So John, just so you know, if you want to do your consulting wages of 160 grand and then just get a big beautiful tip after that, just so you know, it doesn't count. But those are some of the nuances that I think people are asking about. And then there's also phase outs for really high earners, that even though you hear about some of these different things that exist, whether that's, the SALT provision or other items, a lot of what they're doing, they're capping at high levels of income. So for example, here's an example, like mortgage interest deduction, at up to $750,000 of debt. There's a provision in there for auto loan deductions inside of there. But once again, there's a lot of income thresholds and income phase outs. So I just figured I'd take 3 or 4 minutes, talk about contribution limits, and then talk about this big, beautiful bill that everyone's asking us questions about, and just share that with all of you.
Thanks, Damien.
Appreciate it, Damien. And that is generally Damien's energy level on a day-to-day basis too.
Yes, I did fly in. I was in Canada yesterday, and I flew in, and so it was 3:15 in the morning, and I'm still as awake, and I've only had 1 cup of coffee today.
Thanks, Damien.
You're welcome.
So if you present in October, maybe we'll have you go first.
Yeah, we'll wake everybody up.
Exactly. I see there's one. Oh, just a comment from Mike Guarino that was very informative. Okay. Katie, are you wrapping us up?
Yes, I will. As Damien said, he did share with me those 2 documents, so I can include those in the follow-up email to everyone, just so you could take a look back at that, and hopefully we'll hear more from Damien. He has a lot to share. So just want to thank everyone, our panelists and our attendees, for joining us and participating. This was a great discussion. As John mentioned, it's rare we are going overtime, so that's great. I'm glad everyone had a lot to contribute today. As a reminder, I'll send out the recording as well as the follow-up survey for credit. So if you guys can just complete that to indicate which credits you need, it will also appear in the browser when we end here, but in case you miss it, we'll send out an email probably Monday with all that material. So with that, thanks again, everyone. John, Bud, John, any closing remarks?
From me, just thanks not only to our panelists, but to everyone who participated, asked a question, made comments, and I do see a couple of comments from Bill Egan. Gave a great job, Damien, and he wants to know if we can put tip cups on our desks.
You can write it off as long as you make less than 160. That goes into your contract negotiation. That it sounds like, you know, you should be in the room for.
Yeah, but as a public employee, can you accept a tip, or is that a bribe?
No
Who
comment.
do you think is coming to give any public employee a tip? I mean, let's not get this twisted.
I don't know. There was a
Voluntarily.
lot. There was a lot of love going around in Jefferson earlier, so it might happen there.
Oh,
anyway.
yeah, you're right. You're right.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, great weekend, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone. Take care.
Thanks.